I'm going to call the March 28th, 2024 budget work session to order. Today we're going to kind of focus on capital improvements program and if there's time just to kind of wrap up any type of questions and discussion that we may have. And I think at this point I'll turn over to you, Sam.
So good evening, council, members of the public. This work session is focused on CIP, Capital Improvement Program. We're going to start like we always do with a brief, that is right. We're going to start with a brief review of questions from the last meeting, and we'll leave some of it for the end so that we don't get too bogged down before we can spend the time with the CIP. And then we'll go into a review of the CIP, take any questions that you may have, and then wrap up with what our very few remaining steps are in the budget process as we head into the month of April and conclude the sausage making for the city government and its finances. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Hamill.
Thank you. So I think the largest, of course I started on the wrong slide. I think the one follow-up that we had from last week's meeting was some more information on the refuse and decal, sticker and decal sales information. So we have a chart here that our treasurer's office put together to help us sort of take a look at the details of all of that. The chart that is on the screen now is a snapshot of the sales of decals and stickers for last year. And just to be clear about the distinction between a decal and a sticker, a decal is something that a resident can purchase. They pay for it one time, it goes on their trash can, and it is for collection for a full year of services. We sell those in multiple sizes from 32 gallon up to 96 gallon. And then there are quarterly decals that are used for restaurants. Individual trash stickers are ones that the treasurer's office sells over the counter. We also sell to various merchants throughout the city, where grocery stores and convenience stores, where people are able to buy those stickers and actually put on a bag of trash for each year. For each week. And so last year we sold just over 5,000 annual decals that generated total revenue of a little over $783,000. The bulk of our sales, as you will see, are the individual trash stickers. We sold just over 242,000 of those. For a total cost of $425,000. So in terms of the pricing, the pricing scale, when this was first rolled out, there was some incentive in terms of a slightly reduced price for an annual decal to incentivize the annual decal as opposed to the individual stickers. So some of the scenarios of adding $1 here, adding $1 there. We want to be cautious about what that pricing looks like because it sort of gets those ideas out of line, if you will. Moving along, we do also do large item collections. We did just over 1,700 of those last year. That generated about $69,000. And so all of this together generated the $1.2 million of revenue that we talked about last week. So the next slide is we've met as staff to talk about some scenarios that were suggested at the last week's work session. And through lots of conversation, we still are, as staff, respectfully making the recommendation that council consider not making any changes until the FY26 budget cycle. Again, many of these points here were ones that we talked about last week. The largest one that we have not talked about that I do want to mention is that if we are considering making any fee changes, that would require a 7-day notice and a public hearing. So if that is something that council wishes to move forward with, we will need to make plans pretty quick for that. But just to kind of reiterate some of these recommendations, public service, as we talked about, is working on the new RFP for trash collection services. It is very common in Virginia for localities to subsidize trash collection, and most city services, sorry, I can't read from my own screen, are subsidized as a public good or core service. Waiting until the next budget cycle would allow for a larger discussion regarding our cost recovery target for trash service. There are other considerations for this service as well, such as climate, decarbonization, and sustainability goals. Waiting would also allow for system changes and communication with retail vendors who sell those over-the-counter stickers for us. And it would also allow more public input from end users for the service. And so with that, I'll pause. We do have Mr. Vandiver here. If there are other questions, we have Public Works on the line as well. If you have other questions that you would like to talk about with this.
May I go?
Yeah.
Thanks. So for the fourth bullet, there are other considerations to this service such as climate decarbonization and sustainability. How is that factoring into this particular discussion?
So part of our subsidy includes free recycling, which we feel helps with our landfill diversion goals. And so we feel that contributes to the sustainability goals.
But we're not talking about doing anything about that. We're leaving recycling alone, right?
Perhaps, yes. But that's $500,000 of the subsidy that's currently, of the $1 million that's currently being subsidized.
Right. It wasn't my impression that we were talking about raising recycling prices at all. So that part stays as it is. It would just be the trash collection that does require the sticker. That's on the table.
If that's what you choose to discuss, yes.
Is the point that some of the money that we are raising using, if we were to do away with some of the subsidy like we're talking about, then we would not have the money, the same amount of money able to allow people to recycle for free? Is that?
It'd have to come from somewhere.
Okay.
I mean, I think what I want to just say in this regard is that when we got together as a team and took a look at this, this is not a position on staff is saying we should not consider adjusting fees or anything like that. It was a matter of, do we know that council has all the information that it needs to make the best decision? And there are questions. We feel like there are questions in regards to the impact of making these decisions, that it would be more appropriate for us to bring that information to you so that you can fully consider that. One big example being the disparate impact. That's something that you, as a council with a commitment to JEDI, we always have to concern ourselves with that. That's a filter we should put every decision through, and we're suggesting that we need time to be able to do that. We're also just suggesting at this moment that based on past experience, whenever we touch this, everybody tends to react to it because everybody can absolutely relate to this right now as soon as a change would go into effect. Part of the consideration is, are you aware of how everybody feels about that, and do you need more time to figure that out? In that conversation, we would imagine that you would hear things that would cause us to need to go back and do additional work. So I think what we're suggesting is that we can do that work and then bring that information back to you at a time when you can make a decision and feel like you know everything you need to know.
And I just saw that Crystal had written in the chat.
Yeah, so I saw that as well. So her point was that if we raise the fees, by subsidizing, we are more attractive as a provider than a private hauler. If we continue to raise the fees so that we are no longer attractive, then people transition to a private hauler, they would not be eligible for the free curbside recycling.
Well, I'll say I'm comfortable with waiting to do it, and I guess I still don't understand the exact proposals on the table in terms of how much the increase would be. Would it just be for stickers or decals or both? But regardless, again, I'm happy to kind of delay a decision on this. And my biggest concern is making sure we really think through disparate impact on different income levels in terms of the impact. Because depending on what the proposal, I guess, may be, I mean, you could have someone's cost for trash go up by over $100 annually, which could hit them even harder than some of our proposed tax increases in terms of just the dollar amount on an annual basis. And then I'll say philosophically as well, I guess it seems reasonable to me to view garbage collection as kind of a core service that government subsidy is kind of acceptable to be part of that. But
I have a couple more questions. One, for what you just said about someone who uses a private company to do their collection, I don't understand how that would affect their eligibility for curbside recycling, because we would theoretically not know if they were not using our services. Let's say they went from being a sticker person to not buying stickers from the grocery store. That's not something the city would know, but they still have their recycling bin.
Crystal, do you want to speak to that? Can you allow her to speak, Remy?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a great question. I think it's a good example of one of the scenarios we need to really have a little bit more time to dig into. But the contractor who services the residents for trash pickup, those are the households that have curbside pickup for their recycling. And so even if it's someone putting out a bag, that's still being serviced and that's still in the system. So it's just, I think the point is that's an example of something we'd have to do a little bit more analysis on to understand the implications.
And then, thank you. And then can you explain the incentive structure that aims to encourage people to get the decal instead of the stickers? Why is that something we're interested in? Just the cost of printing stickers?
Yeah, it's not so much the cost of printing the stickers. I mean, there is a cost associated with that. It's more of an ease of administration, and that if somebody's buying an annual decal, they're just having to do that one time. And so they do get a little bit of a discount. Just like, you know, if you sign up for an annual subscription for something, you're probably going to get a discount versus paying for it month to month. And so you can see the cost per gallon is slightly lower if you're buying an annual decal.
Mm-hmm.
So, you still pondering?
Yeah, I understand the hesitancy to make a decision. That's kind of how all of our systems work. There's always processes we have to go through, but I'm also not suggesting that we're like bringing the price from $1.05 to $10. You know, it's 8 cents a gallon for a sticker, 6 cents for a 32-gallon sticker over the counter, and almost 6 cents for a decal. You know, bringing that up slightly just doesn't seem like a huge ask.
So I know that you and Brian are asking questions kind of surrounding this. I just want to know if it's are you asking because you think it's going to have an impact on our current budget, or are you asking because you have an interest in, you know, the recycling and things? Because the way I'm looking at the numbers, I don't think it's going to have a big impact on our $250-$60 million budget. And so I just, what's your, you know, are you doing it because you want to try to make an impact on recycling or that aspect, or seeing if you could like do this instead of maybe the meals tax or the lodging tax or the real estate tax? I'm trying to figure out what you're getting at.
Yeah, I mean, I guess both, but I think You know, it's one of those things, for me, I'm okay this time around letting it pass. I don't, in other words, not tracking this to ground at this moment. We could do it later. I'm assuming that even though we want to get this captured in the next budget cycle, for example, there's nothing stopping us from raising the rates at any point, subject to the seven-day review. So I don't know that we have to wait until a full year from now if you guys get your RFP. I mean, I appreciate the fact that you feel like you need some more work before you're able to give us something really we can respond to. So I'm okay with waiting. I mean, I understand Natalie's point as well, but I don't think that, yeah, I'm okay with waiting, but I do think it's something we should
Yeah.
get some clarity on.
Yeah,
Agreed.
I agree with Brian. We don't necessarily need to wait all the way till next budget cycle. If
Yeah.
we can get that info sooner rather than later, because I know it's not gonna make a enormous impact on the budget either way, but it's also one of those things where if you get a little bit from here, and you get a little bit from here, and you get a little bit from here, suddenly we have $1 million that we can spend on sidewalks.
Yeah, and I think that the point from staff is that, one, the RFP is on the street, and so all of these prices may be invalidated based on the cost estimates that come back. And we will know that in 5 to 6 months. And so even if we made a few changes here, we may have to come back to you again because we might be in a worse situation, could be in a better situation. But I also think that staff wants the opportunity to review sort of what is our collection program. Maybe we want to do things differently, and I think the idea would be that they would come back to you with a full complement of a discussion about that, so that you have more information to make a more timely decision. I don't think it's to punt and keep everything the same for another year. I think they just want more time for more information.
I appreciate that.
And let me just add a couple thoughts. One is, as I said last time, that when this subject came up, I really regard this as sort of one of the core services, and one of the reasons that distinguishes a city from a county. Cities provide garbage service, counties don't. Admittedly, we can argue about whether it has to be fully subsidized or just partially subsidized or just how it all works. But I think it's a core service. The other thing is that I really don't want to be in the situation that, if we can possibly avoid it, there are times we can't avoid it, but this is one we can, where we are making a broad policy decision on the spur of the moment at the last minute going into a budget because we need to find another $500,000 or something. There are some policy implications here. I'd like to know, for example, what are the comparable costs and prices in other cities in Virginia, things that we just don't know. So I have to say I'd be curious to know what the answers are. I'm not real anxious to be raising every single thing a little bit. And there, if we look at it in terms of 1 cent on the property tax rate, that's equivalent to doubling all of the garbage prices. I'm not sure that that's a trade-off that many voters would understand.
So I'd say thank you for saying it that way, because that's probably what I should have said. That was my point. I think it would behoove us just to have the time to get the information, and then to be able to come back with, we may actually have some specific recommendations that we could offer you based on what we see the trends looking like at this point. The market is changing in refuse collection. That is the reality. That is what has been made clear to us as of last year. And we are going to have to deal with this for sure, because we've already seen a significant increase. And what we're anticipating is that when the RFP is done, it's going to probably be higher, because the market is changing. The smaller vendors are disappearing, so the choice is going away. That monopoly means they'll just raise the prices for everybody in return. So by having the time, just a little time to just be able to figure it out, I think we feel like we can do a good job of bringing you what you need to then make what you think is the best decision.
Thank you. And it's worth having just a conversation, a check, like, what's the status of this and how are we
Sure.
doing, and having that fuller conversation and seeing if we are
It may turn
we
into,
wanna
because
go.
I've been noticing that we have work sessions on a bunch of things. So we could be talking about trash for a work session. It's possible. That could be
I
the
don't know if we
subject
need all
matter.
that. Thank you.
So that was the only follow-up item that we had for discussion, other than some of the bigger topics that we can talk about at the end. Was there anything that you all had on your mind that we might have missed, or before we start on CIP?
One thing that we got a couple of emails on this past week is the proposed parking fees. Apparently, there's a proposal, and I saw it deep in the budget book here, that basically suggests that we're to be raising our parking fees in the parking garages by $5 a month, and by some additional, perhaps by some additional amount on an hourly basis. I don't know. Is there in fact some plan for that? I gather that we're changing vendors, I suppose, or managers of the system, effective April 1, from what my email says, is.
Right.
Here
Chris
comes
is
Mr.
gonna-
Engel, is gonna shed a lot of light on this for us.
He will.
Happy to. Yes, in your budget, there is a proposed increase in the monthly parking fees of $5. There's various rates, but they're all going to go up $5. Ranges between 3 and 5%, depending upon which category you're in. The regular transient rate for the 2 garages is not suggested to be changed at this moment, so that's the first hour is free, $2 per hour thereafter. The West Second lot, which is on Water Street, is currently $1 an hour. It's the cheapest parking in town, and that is recommended to be raised to $2 an hour, which will make it equivalent to most others, but still cheaper than one right next door.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The point that keeps coming back to me about parking rates is the recognition that the life cycle of a parking plan in Charlottesville is about 5 to 7 years. About every 5 to 7 years, we have another study that sort of tries to undo whatever people are unhappy with from the last cycle. The last one of these was implemented about a month before the August 2017 Unite the Right rally, and within a month of that, it was decided that the economy of downtown Charlottesville was sufficiently unstable that we would remove all of the parking meters that we had installed the month before. And I gather they're probably still sitting in a warehouse someplace. But in any event, we haven't had parking meters since about September of 2017. Every time we have this discussion, we end up trying to decide whether we are trying to make it easier for people to come shop downtown, whether we're trying to make it harder for employees to take up the parking metered spots on the lot and doing the so-called 2-hour shuffle. There are various arguments that get brought up back and forth, and invariably, whatever we end up with has changed from whatever almost 180 degrees from whatever the thinking had been seven years earlier. If we're going to look at parking rates in some broader way, a $5 increase on a monthly rate doesn't concern me terribly, but if we were to look at it in some broader way, it ought to be in a much more comprehensive manner than just one line on one page in the budget.
And we are having a parking work session coming up soon, right? Were we having a discussion about parking policies? Or was that just, and DS was doing a,
On April 15th, we have a work session on the transportation planning program.
April
be a
15th,
part
we have a
of-
work session on the
yeah.
transportation planning program.
The part of that will be a brief discussion on our upcoming parking study, which is looking citywide at on-street parking.
Okay, and then I'm just repeating this for the people at home. So then, and that includes information about the citywide on-street parking program. Okay, thanks. That's what I was thinking of. Thank you.
So I guess what I'll add to that is, Chris has heard me ask about parking meters. So we've talked about it. He gave me the history. I understand that it is complicated here. I don't know why it's this complicated, because I've lived in many other places where it's not very complicated. You just put up a meter and you pay to park, and it's just that simple. I think there is some conversation that we're going to continue to have in that space and bring that forward. One thing that I was looking to is to see what comes out of Ben's work in that regard before we really talk about a full plan or anything like that. But I think there's work to be done. That's probably the best way for me to respond to it at this moment, and we'll come back to that later.
Okay.
So before we move on to the CIP, I want to take just a second, because we've been getting a lot of questions that reference PDF pages, and I just want to make sure that, one, there's a lot of CIP information that's in the online budget book that is not in the printed book or the PDF. So I just wanted to take 1 second to just navigate to our online budget book to make sure that you all are aware. This is our budget webpage, and if you click on this budget cover, it will open up our online budget book. All of the information in here is part of the PDF and part of the printed book, except for specific details on capital projects. So what's in the PDF and in the book is sort of the overview of the CIP, but what is included in the online book is, if you navigate to this capital projects button, you will see that there are categories of the projects. So if we were to pick on Parks and Rec, you will navigate to a page that lists all of the Parks and Rec projects, and if you click on one of those, it will take you to a page for that project that will provide summary information as well as project descriptions, how it relates to the comp plan, what the objectives are, what the status is of that project, and then it will also provide you with the 5-year finances, as well as some indication of what the operating impacts are. So I just wanted to take a minute. I find that the online book is a whole lot easier to navigate than the PDF, and I just want to make sure that wasn't getting lost. Because like I said, these project pages are not part of the book. It was too many pages to print, so we just provided the summary.
Thanks, I didn't know all that was there.
Neither did I.
Okay,
That probably
check it out.
saved me some emails to you all, huh?
No problem at all. So I'm gonna, let's see, navigate back to the PowerPoint.
And I just have one additional thing from a follow-up is, I've gotten a couple emails from folks who have presented the idea that the city should look at the Seville Gas's pilot as a revenue source, and they argue that that could be a revenue source that comes in part from the county and UVA. I know we've discussed that at some point, I think in a 221. Quite frankly, it's been so long I can't even remember the details. But I was curious if that argument that people have been emailing to us about, is that accurate? Is that really a source of any revenue? Like that's the only other additional thing that came to mind.
Chris, do you want to speak about it?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I'm Chris Cullinan, the city's Director of Finance. So, as you'll recall, the pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes from the utilities to the general fund, what that really is meant to represent is if a private utility, an investor-owned or for-profit utility, were operating a similar function within the city, such as a Columbia Gas or a Virginia Aqua or something like that, they would be subject to some form of taxation from the city. Property taxes, sales taxes, BPOL, all of those sorts of things. Like many other cities in Virginia and across the country, the city implements a pilot to capture that expense of the utility and remits that to the general fund. And so as such, that cost of the utility is then spread out amongst all the ratepayers. So to the extent that there are gas payers in the county and UVA, then yes, they do pay a part of that pilot as an expense of the utility, but that's because they would be paying that anyway, no matter who the provider was. So it's not a, for lack of a better term, it's not a free and clear revenue or a tax. It's part of the gas rates that we establish each year that are paid by all customers of the gas utility, regardless of where they might actually reside.
So for the folks who've emailed us saying that it's a potential revenue source, would it, I'm trying to understand.
A potential new revenue source, is that what you're?
I think they're arguing it could be used to like gain additional revenue. Would that basically just be increasing rates would be the next?
No, the pilot is established by formula, and again, it's agnostic as to where you live. It's based on, it's in the rates, it's in the volumetric rate, so it's based on how much gas you use. And so again, it's you know, the gas, all of our utilities, including the gas utility, operate on a break-even basis. There's no profit, so to speak. And so again, the pilot is an expense of the utility that all users pay based on how much they use, and then that in turn is transferred to the general fund.
So it's already a revenue.
So it's already,
counted.
so the pilot numbers that you see within there include all customers, be they, especially for gas, be they city, county, UVA.
So, but I guess their argument would be would adjusting the formula increase revenue, increase the amount of money coming in through the pilot?
It would, but it would be paid by all customers, including city customers.
Right, so it ends up being like just a de facto rate increase?
It does, but again, because one of the fine lines we have to walk here is that it's not a profit or a revenue-raising mechanism. It's really meant to reflect a cost of the utility that the city would be reaping if it were being provided by a private entity. So it's, there has to be some nexus between the calculation, the potential taxes, and what that might be. So arbitrarily just picking a number would probably run afoul of that concept.
That's helpful as a refresher for me. Just one last question. Is that formula updated on an annual basis, or when's the last time it was
The
updated?
formula itself, and I will admit I always have to go back and look it up, the formula itself stays constant. However, if I recall off the top of my head, it's a percentage of revenues of the gas utility minus the cost of gas. And so that number changes every year. So, you know, if I just off the top of my head, if I had to guess, it's probably going to be about 3 or 4% each of the last couple of years. So there's an increase as we go along over time, even though the formula itself is the same.
That being driven by just market changes?
Just by changes in the gas utility, the cost of gas, expenses, those sorts of things. And the same thing for the water and sewer utilities as well. It's a different formula, but it's the same concept based around the revenue being generated by each of those utilities.
That's helpful.
And it's a preview that we'll have utility rates coming up in the next month or two, and I'm sure that'll be a point of discussion at that time as well. I'll be happy to look forward to having that conversation with you again.
Thank you.
Chris? Once we got onto this, I was curious about something. Looking at the last few years of actuals, it appears that as a general matter, the revenues in the gas utility have been more than the expenditures in the gas utility, although that's not invariable. Some year, at least in 2023, it was not. What happens to what I'll call retained earnings, for lack of a better way to characterize it?
So if you're looking purely at budget to actual, it can be a little bit misleading because one of the things that's unique about the gas utility is that the price of gas changes every month. And so we make adjustments over the year. So as again, if it operates on a break-even basis, so as gas rates, the cost of gas goes up, we pass those along to customers. When price of gas goes down, we adjust that downwards through the purchase gas adjustment, or the PGA if you ever look at your gas bill. And so when we set the budget every year, we're taking a little bit of a projection of what we think the cost is going to be over the course of the year. And so that budget is a point set in time, but the actuals over time will vary because not only does the price of gas vary, also the number of warming days, weather, those sorts of things. So, and because we make that adjustment on a monthly basis, over time they even out. Now, That's to say that there are years when we are a little bit over or a little bit under, but we do have some amount of fund balance within the gas fund that can accommodate that. And to the extent there are any overages in terms of revenue in a year, it stays within the gas fund. And again, because each year that can go up and down, that sort of helps even that out over time.
Well, I mean, I'm just looking at the actuals for '21, for example. Revenues are something like $1 million more than expenses during fiscal year '21. During fiscal year '22, they were $4 million more, but then fiscal year '23, $4 million less. And I guess my question was, and obviously that reflects that fluctuation year to year.
Yep.
My question, number one, is the amount that is in this fund, which is essentially, I suspect, is essentially years of accumulation of retained earnings at some, offset by some losses, obviously.
Right.
Is that amount stable?
Relatively, I mean, we do have, in the utilities, we have financial policy maintaining so many days of working capital, which we maintain. The gas fund's a little unique because we do have more of a fluctuation than we do in water and sewer. So over time, those numbers go up and down, but we're able to maintain that financial policy plus a little bit more, which every year when we do go to set rates, we do evaluate what is the cost of gas doing. If it's going up significantly, we may use some fund balance to kind of shave the peaks off a little bit to lessen the impact on the customer. We also use those funds, we don't have any debt associated with the gas fund. We do all of our capital improvements with cash. But as you know from our discussion Tuesday night, our system is fairly up to date, so we don't really do a lot of those, but we do have to make a few improvements every now and then to maintain things. So having that available working capital within the gas fund helps us manage all of those fluctuations and some uncertainties to a degree.
But I guess the question for broader budgetary purposes for this discussion is, if that fund balance was increasing by $2 million a year every year, that would be a different budgetary concern from if it's essentially staying the same.
It's essentially staying the same. I see where you're going with your question. Yeah, we're not adding that on year after year. There are some years we may have 1 or 2 years in a row where, as you pointed out, we have revenues come in exceeds expenditures, but then we do have a year when it doesn't. And so over time, that does help us even those things out so that we don't have to go back to the ratepayers and say, hey, we're running a little short. We need to raise your rate by some amount. But as I mentioned before, it's designed to operate on a break-even basis, but it's very different than water and sewer because, again, natural gas is such a volatile commodity. It's dependent on so many factors that are beyond our control. And so to the extent when we set the budget every year, we're looking into our crystal ball a little bit, but in reality, we are adjusting it every month to reflect those realities and those changes.
Thank you.
I think you can go, yeah.
Anything else? We're ready for CIP.
Yeah.
Okay, so to jump into the CIP. The 5-year plan, here's a summary of the 5-year plan. This is largely the same plan that was presented to the Planning Commission way back now, it seems like forever ago, in November, December. There have been a few minor changes, but nothing material. Again, looking over the 5 years, we are looking at a CIP of just over $177 million, with $123 million of that being funded by bonds, 41 million of that coming from the general fund, and most of those transfers are based on our policy of at least 3% of the budget going into CIP as cash. The CIP contingency, this was an account, I have a slide about this a little bit later, but spoiler alert, the CIP contingency had gained a big balance due to a reserve that we had pulled back all cash funding in '21 for COVID. We put that in a reserve, and then when we found out we did not need it, it got returned, and then we've had several large surpluses, which built up a contingency balance, and so Some of that was part of the plan in funding the Beaufort School project. And then some of it is just sort of applying these funds back into the CIP as additional cash as we move forward to, one, save, keep the general fund transfer as level as possible, and also to, prevent selling unnecessary bonds. So if we look at the 5-year expenditures, just from, if you were to say that you were spending based on your priorities, if you look at the totals over the 5 years, the 3 top funded areas are education, affordable housing, and transportation and access, in that order. This is a plan from the next 5 years. It does not take into account all the things that are already have been approved and on the books. And from a point of order, basically council appropriates the dollars for 25, but the 4 years out are a plan at this point. So moving along, we will look at each of these categories at a project level detail. So if we look at the education projects first, in 25 we are spending just over $5.8 million, or roughly $5.8 million, $56.2 million over the next 5 years. The biggest add here was the Walker Pre-K Center, which we've programmed in for 27 and 28. In addition, it maintains the $1.2 million a year for school priority improvement projects. These funds go before the school board CIP committee, and they're able to pick priority projects that they want to fund throughout the schools with that money. It also puts in some money for the many needed roof repairs that we know are forthcoming on some of the buildings. And then funds some other projects as well for schools.
So, am I correct in saying that the only thing that is different between this slide and what we saw in November was adding the $30 million a few years out for Walker?
Correct. Facilities projects, these are projects that typically end up being largely for school, city facilities and buildings. There is a lump sum that gets funded each year. That is for things that are like painting, door replacements, sort of more than the average maintenance, but not leveling up to high dollar, multi-million dollar projects. HVAC replacement, the city and solar PV program. Currently, that account had been accumulating funding. It currently has a balance of just over $600,000. And as we were looking to determine what climate action initiatives we may be taking, and also as we continue to look for other grants and energy performance agreement opportunities, we decided to pause the funding in the future years for those. But that would be part of something that we would re-examine each year as different things or opportunities become available. General District Court, this was some additional money. If you recall, several years ago, we budgeted the city's large lump sum contribution to that project. There were a few changes to the project in the scope. One was a hearing room, and then there were some additional furniture and fixtures. So that's the additional funding that's been added here. The Ravenna Solid Waste Baler and Baling Facility, that is actually a project for which we are a partner to pay our share of that project. That's a project that's being managed by Ravenna, and this will just be our payment for that share of the project. We've talked at length about the climate action initiatives. Last year was the first year that we put $1 million in, and as part of continuing that priority, the city manager prioritized that and added $1 million for each of those years in the out years. And the sustainability team is working and has laid out some plans for how that will be used over the course of those years. And then the one ad, which was, I don't think, I might be wrong, I might be getting this confused, but I don't believe this was in the planning commission version.
It was
The
not.
library has been added.
And
And that timing, I'm sorry, that timing is in step with what the county is doing in their CIP, as well as they are a joint partner in that project.
Is that a total cost, or is it past that 5 years, a few more allocations for the library?
That is our projected total cost at this point.
Is it-
Having said that, will be going through a design process, and the numbers may change.
That's about 20
but,
million if I'm looking at it?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
About 10 million.
For
10
us.
for us.
Yeah.
So 20.
And the county's just going in like 50-50 split?
Mhm.
And right now, the schedule, as Chrissy mentioned, that's what we've been able to come to agreement on for what their CIP can handle to match ours.
So, a couple of questions. One is, in addition to the library, I note that this slide shows 400,000 more in the first line for lump sum facilities capital projects, 400,000 more than what it showed in November. Is there something in particular that folks have in mind?
There is, and you caught me. Let's see, Mr. Goddard, are you online? Can you help me recall what that was for? I believe it was for a chiller replacement.
I do not believe so. My understanding was that that was to offset the cost of some FF&E for the general district court, but we may need to revisit that and get a clear answer for you.
Okay.
That would be the line item about 3 or 4 lines down from that.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
looking at
correct.
lump
I'm a little
sum.
confused on that myself, so I'll have to check into that tomorrow.
Okay. The other question I had relates to things like the climate action initiatives. Is there a fund that is being created there that we're adding $1 million to, or is that a $1 million expenditure that we're expecting to keep spending? Is that going to accumulate if we don't spend it?
So, there was $1 million allocated in the '24 budget. As with all CIP funds, each year's budget will be added on top of anything that is unspent from the prior year. I don't think that the intent here is to accumulate $5 million before we do something. I know that the team has multiple projects laid out. They're also seeking several grant opportunities for which these could be used as grant matches.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to add?
So this was viewed as large grant match as well as projects. So those funds will be prioritized by the sustainability team and then deployed. The expectation is that we would ramp up the activity of being able to deploy those funds every year, hence the recurring balance.
Thank you. That's all I've got on this page.
And what we will be able to clearly demonstrate going forward, which is what I've been expressing as the expectation, is that the production of the annual work plan will also speak to that. So you'll be able to see it after budget adoption. The work plan for the upcoming year would then coincide with some of the particular efforts.
I want to recap the school solar thing, just so I heard that right. So we've got outlays for the first 2 years as we replace the first couple of roofs. We're seeing how that goes, and then we're reassessing for the last couple of roofs.
So I don't think there's, Crystal, would you like to speak to that? I don't think there are actually school roof solar projects that have been,
No, I'm happy to jump in real quick. So solar is expensive, and the opportunity to put solar on a roof has to be closely aligned with a building that is structurally sound and a roof that is able to, a new roof that's going to have a long enough lifetime for that solar not to have to be taken off again. The next project that is in the hopper that funding is dedicated to is solar on the bypass fire station. And then we have been looking at some different ways to bring the funding in to address the larger solar projects. So CHS, the Buford Middle School, K-Tech, and some of the elementary schools are essentially the largest public building rooftops in our portfolio. And a solar system that is in the capacity of a megawatt is a $3 to $4 million project. And so we are certainly looking to see if we can leverage some of the federal funding opportunities. We are also actively exploring what some power purchase agreement scenarios would look like, and looking to then revisit aligning the funding needs for these funded roof projects going forward. But as Chrissy said, we've got to try and explore some of the options in the next couple years to be able to, A, spend down what we have, and B, have a really concrete plan going forward. And so it's our intention to have the dollar amounts of like outright owned projects landed so that you all have awareness of that sooner rather than later, and then look at ways to either bring the funding in or revisit what the request would be in future years.
Mike, did you want to add something?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I'm a little off my game today. That 400,000 in the lump sum to facilities capital projects was to offset the FF&E package for the bypass fire station.
Okay.
Is that clear enough? Sorry.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this page? Mike, you're batting 1,000 here. So the public safety projects, most of these are, although they're in the CIP, they are somewhat recurring, but they are intended to sort of level fund what tend to be large expenditures if we waited to do it all at once. Fire trucks obviously are very expensive. They're also bondable items, which is why they appear here, as well as ambulances. There were some additional upfits for the bypass fire station. And then the mobile data terminals and the portable radios, that's been an item that's been in the budget. The portable radios are about $6,000 a piece. And so there is a cyclical replacement cycle if for police and fire, because of the numbers they have, that allows us to replace about 7 of those a year. I know fire in particular has upwards of almost 50 of those. I do not recall off the top of my head how many police have. And then sheriff has some number that's a little smaller than that. Sheriff has a smaller number in 25 because they just went through with the 800 megahertz. They replaced a bunch all at once, and so that's why the number is smaller in 25, but then amps up a little bit in the out years. The breathing apparatus and the protective clothing for fire, again, these are large capital outlays that we have been able to secure grants for in the past. I believe both of these items have also seen large market price increases. And so the idea here is to create a sustainable funding source to be able to replace a few on a cyclical basis. There's also some advantage with all of this, replacing them on a cyclical basis, in the sense that if there is something that becomes outdated or something that becomes defective or faulty, you're not trying to replace all of them at once. You're just trying to replace a smaller number. Again, I think the intent here is if there are grant opportunities to still try to seek those, but at least for now, we do have a planned funding source to replace those.
So if I'm to read this correctly, a typical ambulance costs about $450,000. That's for one?
Correct. And just a note on those, so also we are seeing very large increases and also very large 2 to 3 year market delays on the availability for fire trucks in particular.
So you would place an order and it could be 3 years before we get it?
Yeah.
I noticed that the CIP as it came to the Planning Commission included $175,000 for a Fontaine alerting system
Thank you.
in next year. What happened to that?
We actually, there were some operational needs that the equipment began to fail, and there was a item that came to council, and we moved it up, and that's being funded in the current year, so
Okay.
there was no need to leave it in the CIP.
I thought I remembered something tickling my mind there, but,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, thank
No,
you.
Thank you. I meant to bring that up. And the big group, transportation and access projects. So there are a lot of items here that we see every year. The sidewalks, we talk about a lot. The traffic infrastructure replacement, that is a fairly new item. We have gotten in, we have spent many years not addressing that infrastructure, and worked with a consultant who came in, did a review of those, found that many of those were well beyond their useful life. We've actually had one that failed. And so that has been an item that we added to the CIP, and again, that will be something that they are working through a cyclical process to keep those replaced and maintained.
For that, I went and I looked in the budget work thing for a little more info. And it says that 5 of the priority 1 intersections were identified based on poor assessed condition. Please see attachment. But
Is that in the narrative in the budget book?
it doesn't,
I don't
there's
think
nothing to
so.
click on. It's not a hyperlink.
I'm sorry, we'll get that for you.
Okay, because I would love to know what those are, because, you know, if this is part of the, like, if we could redesign the roads in a way where we don't need the traffic signal there, it saves us this replacement money down the line, and it becomes a one-time investment instead of a yearly cyclical replacement situation. So I would be curious to find out what those intersections are, to see if that's something that the transportation team could take another look at.
We'll get that for you, and we'll make that link active as well. Any burning questions you want to talk about on this page?
Yeah, so,
I
over
knew you
the,
weren't going to let it go.
no, but this is over the last day or so, I think we all have received a lot of questions about sidewalk and investment in sidewalks, and we're not proposing to, so I'm not sure where the questions are coming from, if we're proposing to decrease the funding in sidewalks, or
Or just,
if,
do we have enough funding to do
Yeah.
what we need to do?
so if you could just explain, because a lot of people may be listening, okay.
So, as James, our new Deputy City Manager for Operations, is coming to the microphone, I shared with him on the way into the building that for my entire existence here in Charlottesville, all I've talked about is sidewalks.
Yeah.
So, and just because his promotion took effect this week, he gets to go into the deep end tonight. But what I want to say about this is, you've heard me a couple of times now come before you and talk about the challenges of our being able to up our game. That's been basically what I have shared with you, that I was focused on and I was committed to making happen, and that we were doing things in the past that we shouldn't have done. And there was a number of things in relation to that. Some of it being, we said yes to every request. We then came and asked for money and didn't have the capacity to do the work. We said yes to every request many times over, so we had multiple lists. The lists were conflicting with each other, so we didn't know what the priority was. And it made it quite difficult for anybody to understand, okay, what are we doing next? And when I got here, one of the first questions I asked for is, so where's the priority list? To show that we prioritize. And I didn't get an answer. I got a stack of things. And then I said, but how do you know which one to do next? If each one of these has their own list and the lists are not the same, how do you know which way to go? And the answer was, so that's why we were dealing with what we've been dealing with. I found that to be deeply frustrating because, again, everywhere I went, everybody wanted to talk about sidewalks specifically because that was the example of where we weren't making progress. What I have prioritized in my time here was, one, picking this guy to be our planning director so that he could try to get some sense of some of the things that were going on, getting our public works director in place so that he could look at some things, getting a transportation planner who could actually then try to make sense of all the various attempts at trying to figure out what is a list that is a worthy list for us to work on. And it has taken this much time for us to get to a place where we have now what I believe the right set of conditions to begin to move forward in a positive way of producing new sidewalks. I prayed often that by the time we had this meeting tonight, that I could have demonstrated for you that we actually delivered on 2 sidewalk projects that have been talked about in this community for years, which was deeply frustrating to me. And we've done that. The East High section and now the Elliott Street section are done. 2 very small projects, and not that I want to be overly excited about small things, but sometimes you have to celebrate the small things because the big ones are possible now. We have put together, again, the right set of conditions. I know that tonight there is going to be a mad push for more money to go into the CIP. I'm not going to fight you this time. I know you're expecting that I might. I'm not going to, because I do think that the team has done the right work. And I wanted James to just describe a little bit about what we have been able to accomplish, because we got here, with another less than 24 hours before we're going to be releasing what is the new list. And it's the list we're not going to change. We're not going to change and do anything else but this list. We may make some different decisions about order at some point, but this is going to be released as the example of how the city can focus on getting things done. And then we'll spend the money that you decide to put into the CIP for all of the remaining years going forward, so that we can come back and show you that, yes, we got all these sidewalks done. These are the next batch of sidewalks that we will get done. But I'm going to remind you that we have an ADA transition plan that is coming later this year, and it's going to call for a lot more money to be spent. Sidewalks are going to be on that list as well, because the focus of this conversation right now is only about new. We have a lot of problems with existing. So there's going to be a balance that has to be struck in our being able to get all of this done, because we have a backlog, and the backlog is going to be very expensive for us to clear. So I'm done. I'm going to let James describe what we've actually been working on, and then I'll let you tell Chrissy what she's got to do to the CIP to make you happy.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Mayor Wade, members of council. I almost feel like this should lead off with a drum roll. Maybe that was the...
That was
okay,
it.
there we go. So tomorrow morning, we will be releasing a sidewalk prioritization plan. And credit to our transportation planner, Ben Chambers, for leading this effort of putting this work together. He's been working closely with our colleagues in DPW. The prioritization plan that you all see tomorrow includes basically that stack of sidewalk projects that Sam described. It draws from our bike ped plans, it draws from the Streets at Work plans, it draws from small area plans. A lot of these different plans that prioritize sidewalks, but those were never prioritized together to actually come up with a comprehensive list that someone could work from. So that's the work that we've done. You'll see a plan that calls for $4.5 million of spending over the course of 6 years. So what does that represent? That represents 3 tiers of projects. And don't think of the tiers as prioritization. Those tiers are on the case, basically the difficulty of implementation. Tier 1 are the easiest projects. That money represents the funding for design and build. Tier 2 is kind of the next level of projects where there are kind of unknown conditions in terms of utilities or slopes or conditions in the soil, whatever it might be, that represent unknown conditions that we can't really estimate construction costs yet. That $4.5 million includes the design for those Tier 2 projects. Tier 3, we don't have any funding allocated yet for. Tier 3 are the most difficult projects, the largest projects with the greatest degree of unknowns. Most importantly, many of those, if not all of those Tier 3 projects require us to work with a partner such as, most often, UVA or Albemarle County, some other entity. All of Tier 1 and Tier 2 are kind of sprinkled in across the calendar in terms of when they would move forward towards implementation, again, over that 6-year timeframe.
So,
And that's it. Yeah, let me go to questions.
so that 4.5 million to get through, I guess, the backlog of projects, that is not currently funded, or is there already sources of revenue to complete that?
No, that's not currently funded.
Okay.
Is that expected to be $750,000 a year times 6?
Right now, we have it set up as ranging between $600,000 and $1 million per year, and it kind of ramps up over time.
Okay.
And then, maybe this relates to Tier 3, but from my understanding, one of the big structural barriers for these projects was right-of-way acquisition. Is that something that's resolved as part of being in a good place?
It's identified as part of that complication. Anything with right-of-way acquisition is going to be in either Tier 2 or Tier 3. And I should note that what we've done in this prioritization, we haven't actually prioritized every single project that's identified. What's identified for this first 6 years is the ones that ranked as the top, most highest priority items. I should ask, about how many projects total?
It's
About 30 projects at this point. And they range in different scales as well.
And many of these have probably been designated as high priority in some study or another for at least 10 years.
It's
Yeah, the
possible.
Bike Ped and Streets of Works are both, I think, 2015 plans, yeah.
So, in the past, there has been some CDBG funds for sidewalks, and then, other priorities. So, is this list that's coming out tomorrow, is it like combining all of these different lists together?
It drew projects from all these different plans where sidewalk projects were identified.
Yeah, and then the reference to CDBG was just, that was the choice of funding source that was utilized to address that particular project that you're remembering.
Yeah.
That, as I also expressed, was one of the examples of bad practice, because we have a timeline attached to CDBG funds, and complicated projects don't
Yeah.
support a timeline. So part of the strategy has been to make sure that if we're going to ever approach the idea of using CDBG funding for a project, it's got to be on the higher tier, that first tier, so that shows that it can be done quickly. Because if we pick one of those more complicated ones, it's unlikely that we're going to actually deliver the project and thereby hopefully not affect our timeliness concern. So that's been part of the work. That's why, and that's, I guess, some of the work behind the scenes that had to be done to get to what is it that we were doing that was making it impossible for us to deliver. I think we've diagnosed a lot of that stuff, and now we figured out how not to do some of those things.
And so the funding for that is not shown here yet?
Today, that request that Ben is sitting back there anxiously waiting to see what you all are going to do is not funded.
How much money do we have in the sidewalk savings account?
Hold on, show you.
Or is this jumping ahead to the how are we paying for this conversation? With the caveat that I'm thrilled about this project.
Thought so. I've been trying really hard.
But I am nervous. I mean, if we're already strapped for cash with what we have, if we're already trying to raise taxes, if we're already committing to funding other projects that some of us might not agree with in the future, where's that?
That's the balance of it.
What are we
Yes.
trading?
And these, so there's 500,000 over 5 years now, so for us, the question is $4 million of funding to complete the backlog, kind of? And then those would all be bondable, or would it be cash?
It could be a combination,
Depends.
on the project.
There might be some packaging of projects that then we could put out for bid for one contractor to do it. There's that part of it as well. That's the reason why the funding source, knowing how much money we actually have, is important, because that's another crack at this whole process that Ben then gets to spend some time with Public Works staff as well to figure out.
So this is our Budget Explorer, which is also a link that's on our webpage. This is a tool that my colleague Brian Ray actually designed. It's an internal tool. This is updated through the second quarter. We're just on the cusp of finishing the third quarter, so this will soon be updated. But you can navigate here, and this will give you a snapshot. Again, this is the end as of December 31st. Of the expenses in the current year and any carryover or unexpended balances in projects. So right now for new sidewalks, we're sitting on just under $1 million. We've got sidewalk repair, which has about $1 million. There are multiple sort of pots of money for sidewalks, but I would say those are probably the two. There's also some for ADA upgrades of project sidewalks.
Does that multimodal improvements 500,000 count as well?
That one.
That's a specific project.
Yeah, that's a specific project.
What, I can't see, I don't have glasses. What is the new sidewalk total? Because that's really the number.
998,000.
So that 998 is what you could subtract from the $4 million request.
So that would go towards that.
Not all of it, because we've
Some of
already.
it's allocated. Some of it's dedicated to VDOT revenue sharing projects.
So that means we have 500,000
Of
of
that.
that is considered to be available.
The 400,000 you're going to see Monday night as an agenda item. Monday night or in the next meeting as an agenda
Yeah.
item.
Okay. But then there's the 1,000 from or the 1 million in sidewalk repair.
Nope, we would not count that because that's not for new
That's
sidewalks.
set aside for
That's for
repair.
ongoing maintenance and repair work to existing sidewalks.
Could that be applied to the ADA improvements since that is repair? in a
It would
sense?
be, it would probably be able to be reprioritized based on the results of the 88 transition plan, because once that plan is done, it will then highlight in a series of recommendations what things must get done ASAP, I guess. In that work, Public Service would have the ability to go back and look at their plan schedule and make any adjustments to accommodate, but it's probably not going to be a one-for-one, so then we'll probably need additional funds to be able to bring some of those to completion.
So, we need about $3.5 million.
I would say, Ben would want me to say 3.7, so we don't lose anything that we really need.
So we could take $1 million from traffic signal replacement.
No, then you're risking traffic signal failure
Does that mean falling?
Collisions.
to some degree. There's a variety of issues, but this is ongoing maintenance, so it would not be viewed as something that you simply pull from, because we're planning a schedule of replacements as we anticipate failures to likely begin to occur.
And I'll also say, I think, from my understanding, I think we're probably like potentially decades behind in terms of syncing all our signalization, which a lot of other localities have already done, which also, I mean, I don't know how you would quantify the size of it, but presumably that has some impact on emissions in terms of cars needing to idle for a larger amount of time because nothing's synced up.
Yeah. And that type of project is on the radar. It is a part of our VDOT portfolio. It's been stuck. We've had various contributing issues to that, hence why there's a work session for you coming where we're going to present to you the work that's been done on rebooting that effort. And that too will become a future celebration moment for me when I can tell you that, yes, we are getting those things done that have been sitting for so long. So we're pulling on everything that we possibly can and trying to reset so that we can actually deliver.
And I know many of our signals today don't have the capacity to do syncing, right?
Yeah,
So
right.
that's part of,
And so
that is in
that's
fact part of the project.
185 in here for the traffic signal coordination.
Mhm. So there's upgrades and then coordination aspects, because not everything is ready to fail or approaching failure, but we still want to add the technology to what we are going to have for a minute.
And then how much of the streets and sidewalks, 1.25 and then 1.5 million, is actually for sidewalks?
None, that is actually for paving.
Can we retitle that?
Probably.
The street milling and paving? Is that 1.25 million?
Yeah, but it's called streets and sidewalks.
That's just
That's
all
to
of
help
that up.
identify it.
Yeah, we can
Kind of
do something
misleading,
with
yeah.
that.
Tell you, the most
I can-
frequent complaints
I
I've
can-
gotten about the need for street milling is from bicycle riders.
Yeah, there are definitely places to improve. And then is there any other funds, any other savings accounts that we get to pull from, like the parking garage or anything like that?
So we, as a general rule, do not have savings accounts.
I was gonna say that too.
The
You
only
know what I
one
mean.
is really the CIP contingency. I think, you know, as Mr. Sanders just noted, that it is certainly at council's discretion to reallocate dollars from one project to another, but with those decisions come trade-offs. And so, you know, the answer's not no, but it may be worth investigating, but it's at your discretion.
And again, I give you, this is the answer you don't like, but I'm going to give it to you because it's the honest answer. There is work still to be done. I've also admitted that over the course of my tenure here, that we have work to do in our CIP to make sure that this document that we rely on so heavily is accurate, that it is telling us exactly what it is that we need and what it is that we absolutely need to do as what has been prioritized. I can't at this moment tell you in which of these lines is there any amount of potential money to grab and reuse, but it's my intention to be able to do that for you at some point soon. It's also my intention that before we would ever identify what you could grab, I would have simply worked with the team to fix that, so that there would be not really anything there with the ability to be grabbed. Because what we could end up doing, and what I would hope that we would be able to do in a future budget iteration, is to bring to you a request to redistribute, because we have reprioritized projects. Thereby, there's not an ask for additional monies. We're just going to move it around to actually make sure that it gets to where it needs to go.
And I would just say, whether you look at the Budget Explorer, not so much in this 5-year plan, but if you were to look at the Budget Explorer and available balances, one thing that you have to consider as well, particularly with VDOT projects, is that many of those are largely funded by state and federal dollars. And so if you were to pull the budget from those funding sources are likely not available. So they're not necessarily, it's not necessarily available money. Everything is worth looking at, but it's not always a one-to-one trade-off.
And if you happen to remember, what's the ballpark for like 10 million of bondable projects, what that annual payment is in terms of the impact on our budget?
It's just, I would say a good ballpark, easy number is about $1 million a year for
Okay.
10 million.
So you're looking at, if these were bondable and not cash projects, you're talking about $400,000 or $500,000 a year in terms of our budget impact.
Correct.
I think that's just important for us to kind of frame the.
And we have a slide about that too.
Also, if we could, our Public Works Director has his hand raised. I wanted to see if he wanted to share something specific for you.
Good evening. There's a few things that have been discussed about paving, traffic signals, and then some of the street funds and the sidewalk funds when it comes to maintenance, and how can we use some of the sidewalk funds or utilize those dollars. We get VDOT maintenance allocations that are specifically used for improvements to the pavement and the roadways. And there's an ADA requirement that is pretty clear that before we pave a road, any of those areas that are inadequate from an ADA ramp standpoint, or if they don't have ADA access, that we got to make those improvements before we pave the road or concurrently. So the challenge we've been having with our pavement program is to make sure that we make it ADA compliance. And so the whole concept of having those combined with paving and the sidewalk projects is to accommodate that. Same with the traffic signals when it comes to replacement of some of our mask arms and some of our other light and synchronizing the corridors to make sure that there's consistency so you don't stop at every light. Those those type of programs are funded by VDOT. And so when we look at everything with the paving, but fortunately, we have about $2.5 million of paving program going out this spring. It's essential that we continue funding and realize that VDOT also regulates our paving program. And the challenges, again, is while we would like to move forward with a lot of paving, is we have to make sure that we're in compliance with the ADA requirements. So I wanted to share that with you when we start looking at all these line items, that some of them, there's strings attached to those dollars. That's the point from the state that requires us to utilize those funds in a way that the state and the federal requirements are. So I just wanted to share with council and the public the challenges we're having with paving sidewalk improvements. Now, when it comes to sidewalk maintenance funds, those dollars are used just for anything that's a maintenance replacement. Anything that's an upgrade, we don't use those dollars. It's specifically for if there's a section of sidewalk that is a concern because of a safety hazard or an ADA hazard because of it's in a situation that needs repair. We only do it for that. We don't make it, enhance it, or anything. So we have an ongoing challenge in those areas, and I just wanted to share with you all that we do have a program and we're moving forward. So I hope that's helpful to understand the budget line items.
That's definitely helpful, thank you. And I don't know if I'm jumping ahead, but I guess I'll just say my initial thought is if we provide the funding to work through that existing backlog, it sounds like it's backloaded a little bit in terms of the money wouldn't be able to be utilized until maybe FY26, or there would be a bump in the outer years. To me, it would seem to make the most sense to program that in as a bondable expense. And I don't want to be flippant about it, but it's at least possible that our revenue growth, I feel like that $400,000 a year in terms of the payments on those bonds could even be covered by just general fund growth. If the economy is strong, granted, that, that's not a guarantee, but that just seems feasible to me. I'm not even sure we necessarily need to look at pulling from the CIP contingency fund or an existing fund or something like that.
Well, part of my challenge has been, while I've normally walked away from the CIP presentation and this moment in our budget process, feeling a little guilty for not being able to give you the better answer. This is where we are. We're as close as we could ever be right now to having the clarity of what does it really take to do what it is that we've decided we want to do. We're still at this moment not quite there. That's what this list represents, having tier 1, 2, and 3. We don't yet know which projects are best suited for packaging, thereby knowing how much that could cost, so then we can determine in that year we could get to it how much we need to have available. And what I have said to our planning commissioners who've been very interested in seeing that number go up from 100,000 a year, I don't know what the number is yet. And we're still kind of there, not knowing what the number is for each individual year. But I feel like I'm prepared to accept whatever recommendation you want to make in increasing it over the next few years. And we'll be talking about this again next year and after, making adjustments.
Well, why don't you just say 250, 500, 750, and $1 million or something like that? Some sort of distribution over the next.
So I guess what I'll do is put Ben on the spot for a quick second and just have him come to the mic and tell us
What's the total delta we're talking about? I'm sorry.
3.5.
3.7 is probably the number. If we were to go by 4.2 is what we need and 500 is what we have. But if you had to look at just FY25, would that take care of tier 1 or would we be in tier 2?
We would be starting tier 1 and tier 2 in FY25. We'd be starting some design work on some tier 2 projects and be doing design and construction on some tier 1 projects in that first year.
And again, that speaks to the challenge of we're doing the design work, so we don't know what that project is going to cost. So it's hard to know what the right number is. We can pick a number and put a number in for FY25, but that's still a shot in the dark. That's why I don't like this particular moment of I don't have the clarity that I strive for in asking you to put something into the CIP.
Ben, do you have an idea of how much would be useful in FY25?
I think it's about $550 or $600,000.
And right now we've got 200.
You have
And
100.
998, or 400,
You have
500,000
500.
on the books.
Right.
You have 500 that
And then
has
in the
accumulated,
bank.
plus 100 that'll come.
Right.
So are you stating like what we have, or what you think we need?
Based on what we laid out for that first year of projects in the draft sidewalk priority list,
What it would
it
take.
looks like about $600,000 in needs for the first year.
Is that, sounds like that's what we have?
That's what we have
So
for just the first year.
Yeah.
for us to land on a decision, I guess, because it sounds like FY '25 is sort of okay, but the future years is the big question. Is the time span of like a week, would that be enough for you all to have kind of more clarity on what may be a useful allocation for us to include in those out years? Or is it still gonna be kind of murky? Because if that week would be helpful to land on specific numbers, I feel like that'll be better than us just trying to
Throw stuff
throw
out right
something
now.
out.
Yeah, I
It,
mean,
it wouldn't for the out years.
the list that you'll see tomorrow will have prices associated with each of the projects and design start and a construction start for each project, just estimated when we think we could get it done. With the Tier 2 projects, we do not have any funding assigned or any estimated costs for the construction side of things. That's in part because we don't know what those things are going to cost, so we can't really estimate that, not even given another couple weeks. And in part, we're trying to load up the dollars for design for Tier 2 because we want to be able to go after grants. And so getting all of that design work done helps us get rid of some of the questions that would come up while we're going after grants, and may make it easier for us to find other funding sources down the road.
To me, it's not critical that we have everything mapped out for the next, the 4 or 5 years. If you've got stuff that you know you need now, and you know the design funds you're gonna need the next couple of years, we'll be back here next year having these same conversations. So I'm not as concerned about what the CIP looks like, the total 5-year CIP, as I am what you think you need next year or the year after that, and sort of what's in your time horizon, because we're gonna be revising it again a year from now. So I'm not sure, you're not needing us, I don't think, to like plan your work for you. You know what to do. You just basically need for the next year, 2 years, enough allocation to get the work going, right?
The work is planned by how much money you make available.
Well,
But it seems like
it's-
we're good for year
We're
one.
good for a year.
And a little bit.
Right, so,
perhaps.
I mean, it's kind of a chicken or egg kind of thing. We won't know the dollar amounts until you've done some design work.
Right.
So
Right.
I would say, let's just get it out there a year, 2 years, make some assumptions and move on. Y'all got
Yeah.
to, sound like a good plan, and obviously, every year, we're going to want to be having these conversations. I'm not sure there's a lot of point, I guess, unless Michael's talking about like planning for bonding or something like that, maybe, but
Well,
You're being disciplined right now. I like it.
Yeah.
and on that note, can you talk about the money that's not been spent that we have for the 7th Street parking garage?
So that money was, there, at the time, we had budgeted, I've forgotten how many $1 million for the parking garage. When the decision was made to not build the garage, I think it was $4 million that was reallocated out of that to the Buford project for bonding capacity, which left a little bit of a balance. At the time, we were in negotiations with the county on what that agreement was gonna look like based on requirements for the courts agreement. And we weren't sure if we were going to need some of those funds to do some other work to meet the terms of the agreement. I don't think there's any current plan, any further plans for those dollars, and that's probably an account we can liquidate.
How much is in that? I don't have that page
1.2.
Oh, okay.
And when you say liquidate, do you mean?
So that was intended to be a bonded project, so that would just come off the books, and that would be additional bonding capacity that you would have to allocate to something else if you
Not
wanted.
cash.
Okay, but it's not, has this been, Are we paying for this amount at all right now?
We don't sell bonds until, one, the expenses have either been spent, or we know that they will be sent within 24 months because there are IRS tax implications with that. So many times when we come to you with a bond resolution, we are reimbursing ourselves 50% or more for expenses that we've already incurred. So the answer is no. Long answer, no.
Okay, so we just would close that out, but that frees up space if we need to bond any of these projects.
Sure, it gives you that capacity.
But I guess what I'm hearing is you don't yet have a plan for what you need bonded.
That's correct.
So a lot of this is just kind of speculation.
So if I would just be myself like I normally am,
Yeah,
I
just
would
tell
have
us
said
what
to
you
you,
need.
So we can
I don't
resolve-
need anything else for FY '25, and in FY '26, we will have clarity on where we're going. That's what I would have said, but
So we
I didn't
can-
want to fight this
We
year.
can,
so.
no, so we can wrap this conversation up, but be excited about.
Correct.
The, project list that's coming out tomorrow, know that FY '25, Ben and his team is fully funded,
And more sidewalks will be coming soon.
and then by the time we come around to this conversation next year, we'll have a better picture of the longer-term needs.
Absolutely.
And I think, to me, it seems like practically the only value of us trying to add additional allocations in out years is to send like a signal to the community that we're committed to it. Similar to like the library
Right.
project. It's a
Zeros-
placeholder, but it knows that we're
Right.
serious about it.
Zeros raise eyebrows.
Yeah, but I feel confident that we're going to remain committed to getting through that backlog. So my position is I don't want, I'm committed to getting through that backlog and filling that $3.7 million delta. However you all feel like is the most effective way to do that, I am fine with. I'm not too concerned about needing to prove with a signal in out years that we're doing it. I think we're going to do it no matter what. And I'm more interested in just programming it into the CIP rather than pulling from the contingency fund or another source.
Yeah, and I just want to quickly add before we move on, with me, with future funding, like, when you find out what you can do, I would like for us to find the money
That'd be the ask.
each year to do as much as you can do in that year, because I walk a lot and, I see the need for it and where it needs, and I know it's not the same funding, where it needs to be replaced, so it's what people see every day and use every day, a lot of people, so, good. Tomorrow morning,
Looking forward to it.
So, a quick question before we leave this. We've talked about a number of different sort of capacity issues with implementation of this. One of the capacity issues identified a couple of years ago was simply not enough project managers within City Hall to make sure these things keep moving. Have we got that situation under control here?
We have. Yes, we have.
Okay.
And we've made some internal structural changes to how we manage projects, and that is where we think the difference is going to be made. That's actually how we got these first two projects done, and how I think the rest of them are going to begin to become a little bit easier for us to do.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just want to go back to this page, if, not specifically about sidewalks.
Okay.
Okay, on this page, we've got CAT Transit bus replacement match of $187,000. How many buses is that?
I don't know how many buses it is, but that is basically intended to be like our 2% match for buses. I think it's 2 or 4% match.
I think it's 2 buses.
Is it 2?
I think it's 2 buses.
Okay.
Okay,
We can confirm that.
and then the following year at 236, do I infer that maybe we're getting 3 buses that year or something?
Yeah, I think that's what
And it looks like it's back to 2, 2, and 1 or something.
he's on.
Okay. Then, when we've got $100,000 allocated for bicycle infrastructure, what is the infrastructure?
So that has been a lump sum account, which also has a accumulated balance in it. There was an associated plan with that at one point. I don't know how current it still is.
And
Do
it's
you-
931,000 of,
There's
I'll
accumulated.
take your word for it, that sounds right.
I'm
But
figuring out.
what's that actually being spent on?
So originally, that line item was for the bike ped master plan and for bike improvements that were associated with that plan. A lot of those improvements have been made, so bike lanes, sharrows that you see all over town. The remaining things is mostly separated bike lanes, protected bike lanes that were identified in that plan 9 years ago. We're starting to move forward with some of those plans, including a road diet on Fifth Street that we're looking at a new alternative for. Once we have that alternative verified, we would want to use these funds to be able to put it in. We're also going to be looking at a West Main restriping program later in the year, and we'd want to use those funds for that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
That's all
And
I've got on this.
do you have
page.
enough for those projects?
So bike projects tend to be fairly inexpensive because they're mostly paint and plastic. We're looking at sort of a demo phase for the Fifth Street, so it's going to be a lot of paint and plastic, maybe rubber curbs, maybe some barrels, fairly cheap materials. West Main is also going to be paint and plastic because it's mostly a restriping plan, so should be fairly inexpensive. I think a lot of the expense is really going to be around the design work and not necessarily the materials themselves. And this seems like it would be sufficient for both of those projects at this point.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
I went to the, can I continue with this slide? I went to the Stribling Avenue presentation last night at Fry's Spring, and there were several plans put up for discussion that cost between $6 and $8 million, which is frankly a lot of money, and also isn't captured by this 4.2. And does this 4.2 include the 2.9 million, or would that be in addition to the 2.9, but still then we're not reaching some of those totals? So where does the rest of that money come from? And can we talk a little bit about that?
So the 2.9 is within the 4.2? Within the 4.2. That 2.9 is the
Loan.
The loan. I didn't want to use the wrong word. The loan agreement, that was the instrument that we had a lot of debate over. It is also the genesis of the lawsuit that was filed against us that I don't know exactly where the status of that is. But irrespective to whatever the result is there, the conversation at the time when we booked it into the CIP was that $4 million is what we were projecting it to cost without having done any design work, without any full indication of what it would cost. The city engineer at that time identified that it is a problematic project, which is why it's not a sidewalk simply on one side of the street and definitely not on both sides of the street, and that we are building a portion of the sidewalk crossing the street and building the other portion of the sidewalk for various conflicts. The answer to how do we solve that problem is we would come back to you and say, okay, it's now $6 million and we need $2 million to make up the difference. But at this moment, it's planning out the project with the details that we now have.
And if that day were to come, what would your suggestion for finding those $2 million be?
It would be a part of our bondable strategy because of the size of that project.
Okay.
That we would say we would add it to the next bond sale so that we could get it moving. Because there was the expectation through the work that was done by council at that time was to coordinate the delivery of the sidewalk within close proximity to the units coming online that was going to add the traffic to that footprint, to that area.
And one of the other discussions we had, or that neighbors seem to have, and I wasn't around for this decision, so I don't remember exactly when it was made, but they seem to think that the condition of the approval for the PUD for that area was that the sidewalk had to be provided. And I don't know if they thought that meant provided by the developer or by the city, but they're also I'm communicating their frustrations. They're frustrated that it seems like the building is gonna happen before the sidewalk is gonna go in.
Yeah, I think we knew all along that this was going to be a challenging project. I don't know that, I was going to say, come on. I don't know that we are clear on the timeline for the housing units to come, but we knew that there was a possibility. I think what you're picking up on is, this has been a very controversial conversation here. And not everyone has been on the same page. We have not hidden anything. We have stated clearly what we believe can happen and that a sidewalk can be delivered. I don't believe we made any connection, because I don't think we can make a connection to the project can't proceed without our building the sidewalk.
And
They
I'm
have
not
to build.
trying to, you know, me,
No,
I'm
no, I
not out
know,
here
I
trying to
know.
delay housing.
Yeah, but they have a sidewalk section that they have to produce. The rest of this was about the sidewalk that we were gonna coordinate its timing. I don't know that we agreed that there was some restriction on that, so I think that's just what people may have interpreted or may have desired, but that is not what actually happened.
Right, that's correct. And also, just to note that Stephen and I are going to be meeting with the developer to understand clearly their schedule. We had a previous kind of high-level conversation where they weren't clear on their schedule. I can't promise you that they're more clear on their schedule now, but we're setting up a conversation with them to learn more about where they believe their schedule is right now. They're still in site plan review. They haven't even, they have to get through that before they even have a construction schedule and understanding of where they're going to be. That project is going to be phased, at least, and this is going back a couple of years now, I guess. They had said that they were going to phase that project over a number of years, so suffice it to say, we are going to coordinate with the developer and understand that to the best of our ability now and in the near term, the relationship between the schedule of their development project and our project. But on top of that, we're also going to talk with them about what kind of construction period measures we can put in place to think about safety issues. I certainly heard, like you did during the meeting, a lot of concern about particularly construction traffic and safety issues around that while the project is underway. That's something we can start a conversation about now and be thinking about a construction management plan that we would hold them to, focused on safety issues on the street. We recognize it's a narrow street. It's a one-way in, one-way out street, so.
Would it be safe to say this is a tier 3 type of project?
Yeah, it's a tier 3, but it's not
Yeah, it
even
might
on
be a
that.
tier
Not-
4,
not
actually.
included in that,
It's
but-
not on that. It's in its own world. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, I do worry about the costs of that.
Yeah.
One of the other things that was mentioned, and I want to kind of get a clear, definitive answer on, not just the folks who live on Stribling, but we've heard it from people on Langford, we've heard it from people on 6th Street and 5th Street, in Fifeville, that they want speed bumps. And we've been told time and again that they can't because emergency services prefers not to have those installed. Is that we legally can't install them, or we are respecting the will of emergency services? And does that include things like speed tables as well? Or the rubbery
Right.
ones?
Stephen, I'll let Stephen, you want to answer some of that?
No, I mean, that is a measure for, or a option for traffic calming, and speed humps, while they serve a purpose, more in line when there's a pedestrian crossing, having it elevated. But yeah, there's been studies that have shown that if you have a speed hump, it slows down the response time for the public safety.
So-
There are other alternatives. Can y'all hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes.
There are other alternatives, and like I shared, some of the out-of-box thinking is more the cobblestone type of concept, where when the vehicle goes fast, the vehicle kind of rattles. But my point of it is, the whole message is, we will be looking at that, but no, legally you can put speed humps.
I will note that the aversion to speed humps from fire personnel is something I've heard in every community that I've worked in. It's universal, and it's not just about the slowing down of response, because there are solutions even to that issue, but it actually presents a hazard sometimes. A fire truck is fundamentally a means of transporting firefighters to the scene of the fire, and they are moving at speed, and when they hit a speed bump, it's frequently the men and women who are serving in the fire service are in their equipment and gear, but they're not necessarily buckled down, and they can fly up into the air, and there have been instances of injuries of fire personnel in those vehicles when they hit a hump. So I have been told this repeatedly, so I believe that message. There are a lot of other options, though, for us to explore, as Stephen was saying, and speed tables are something that I have not heard an aversion to, that fire personnel are more comfortable with that, because it's not an abrupt.
It's not as harsh.
Right.
Because one of the other things that, you know, is data that I've read, that fire trucks and ambulances are called most often not to fires, but to car accidents.
Sure.
So
Yep.
there's a trade-off there, where if there's fewer car accidents because people are driving slower, there's fewer need for the fire trucks to be speeding down the street. So I'd be interested in speed tables. One of the other things I know, Mr. Hicks mentioned cobblestones last night at the meeting, is if that is something that's implemented, if it's done not all the way to the edge, so there's room for a bike to go down. I know driving on cobblestones in a car sucks. It's way worse on a bike.
Yeah.
So that's
I-
something we have to keep in mind as well.
Absolutely. I think our transportation team would be quick to remind us,
Yeah.
but thank you.
So I would add for you, just to kind of also demonstrate one of the conversations that we had early on about transportation planning. That is another example of the kind of work that I imagine that this group will be able to get to when we can get some of the backlog work moving and we're not so consumed by that. Because I've also heard in every community I've been in about police and fire, of course, not wanting the speed bumps. But it does go beyond that because we get snow here and we have snow plows, and that's going to make it a little more challenging to address in that moment. So it's a little complicated. And what you just said at the end is one of the things that I remember hearing as well, is then folks are going to suggest that we need to cut through them or have them not go all the way to the end of the road so that bikes can get through. All of that is planning. We've got to get through some evaluation work that needs to be done. And parking on the street, if you put in certain table, then you're not going to have a place for a car possibly. I know.
Big surprise that.
I
I'm not
know.
too concerned about that.
Sure. But again, we have to balance all of that in doing it. So there's some planning work that needs to be done.
Yeah. And I just want to quickly add on to that. I did a lot of this when I was doing planning in the county. And you just have to have a really robust public input process because, I mean, we want to listen to those who come to us, but it's the 95% of the other people that have to go over that apparatus or whatever every day that will then complain, to the planning department or to us to remove it if we don't get input to let them know what it's going to look like and what to expect.
Yeah.
And even to go to other neighborhoods or places to see what it's like. So
I have experienced that too.
Yeah.
So I
But
do.
anyway.
I also wanted to just take a quick moment and have our city attorney give us an update. He did mention he has more to share on that actual lawsuit that was filed, just so you know.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. I just wanted to give council a brief update on the lawsuit because the news is good. As y'all know, this lawsuit has been going on for several years. When it was filed, initially the city filed a demurra, a motion to dismiss, stating that even taking what the plaintiffs had alleged was true, there still wasn't a basis for the lawsuit to go forward. The judge had agreed with that position, but allowed the plaintiffs to amend their complaint. They did amend their complaint. We analyzed that complaint, found it that a demurra was once again appropriate because we didn't believe that they had stated a claim on which the court could grant relief. That demurra was set for hearing, and on the day before the hearing, the plaintiffs filed a non-suit. A non-suit would potentially allow the plaintiffs to refile within 6 months. That happened in February, so they could conceivably refile as late as August. But given the fact that there was both a complaint and an amended complaint, and they still decided not to move forward with the lawsuit, we would view that refiling as highly unlikely. So the cloud that has been hanging over the possibility of what would happen to that $2.9 million loan had the challenge to the zoning been successful, I think is beginning to dissipate, and we'll have finality on that within a few months. Thank you.
Okay.
Anything else on this slide? Moving along, Parks and Rec, I don't think we changed anything on this, from Planning Commission. A few notes, to highlight. The Meadow Creek Golf Course is a project to replace a very old and failing irrigation system. It is in our CIP. We will bond this project. However, the golf course, through its own revenues, will be reimbursing the debt service fund to pay that debt. So there is a funding, the golf course will be paying that. The Dogwood Vietnam Memorial, those are pass-through dollars that were actually approved at the state level for the Dogwood Memorial Foundation. We have actually received those funds. The foundation has reached out and asked for those to be dispersed to them, and we are just waiting for an MOU from the state so that we can do that. In addition, there was the invasive plant removal. That is level funded from years past. I believe that was a new item that was put into the budget last year. And
there was some misunderstanding that amount might have been cut, and I did speak to individuals who had shared that, but that 75,000 is a continuation, that is not a reduction.
any questions on anything here?
Yeah, the one thing that was changed from the Planning Commission was the addition of about $800 and some thousand on downtown mall infrastructure repairs. So does that suggest that we actually have a plan?
I wouldn't say that we know all of the things, but we do have some of what has been identified by our interim parks director as emergency items. And I think those total 600,000, if I remember correctly.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
about 600,000 that we knew that could be quickly deployed. And I would imagine that we're going to be able to find a few more as he starts that work.
Because, I mean, one of the things, first of all, I'm glad to see that that amount of money has gone from $100,000 in this fiscal year to $728. But I'm struck by a couple of things that are going to be happening in the next year and a half, or 2 years. One is, of course, that the mall itself will be 50 years old, an anniversary that we intend to honor. And second is that I think we can reasonably anticipate that the summer of 2026 may well bring an additional upswing in tourism, 250th anniversary of Declaration of Independence. I'm sure Monticello will have all kinds of things going on, and we would really want to have as much done as we could have done before about May 31st of 2026, it would seem to me.
Yeah, and I think that coincides a little bit with the work that we've been able to have done on the Downtown Mall Committee. Now that we have finished that work, have a plan, an action plan there, then we start to cost some of those projects out. We do have, I believe, $300,000 that has been earmarked within the ARP funds. That makes it possible for us to go beyond this 728 that is here within the next, I guess, the remainder of this calendar year. One of the questions that I have as I've begun to get ready for Mr. Cullinan to bring back the results of our ARC audit to see what other funds we will have available, part of my thought process was to be able to use some of those funds as well to prioritize some downtown mall projects, since that'll be one-time funding for some one-time expenses. And that hopefully will accelerate some of the work that we need to do, and if we needed to come back next year to ask for a more significant allocation for the downtown mall, like what we're proposing in 25, we would have that available as well.
And then I was also curious, after a lot of CHS students came and talked to us from the Green Bacon Club, which is, I still think that's a funny way to think of it, about the trail that they're talking about around CHS. And I remember I asked something about that when they were here a couple times ago, and I assume it's not on this list, but is there anything that we've got moving forward as to say, okay, let's think about, if not for this year, maybe next year or the year after that? Any issues there?
Yeah, Mr. Anthony is on. I would prefer to have him speak to it. It was my understanding that that 4 Mile Loop is not on their active list. It's on a list, but there's a series of acquisitions that even need to occur. which makes it a little more remote for quick disposition of it being done, but wanted to see if he was there.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody, council. So it's a very complex 4 mile. Basically, it was a trail master plan that to make everything connectable that individuals can walk. Where we do run into some small hiccup is land acquisitions. And sometimes land acquisitions take a long time. So we are working, for an example, we've been working with one owner for almost 7 to 10 years on just trying to give us some to buy land to make the connectivity. So we are busy working on certain other portions like the railway, under the railway tunnel. That's been also in the process. But working with the railway companies, it takes a very long time to get permitting through and actually trying to see if we can build a tunnel under the railway line. So it is very complex, but we are working diligently. Staff is working really hard in order to make the connectivities.
Thank you. That's all.
So that doesn't necessarily really speak to the likelihood of that project being done anytime soon, unfortunately. But just because, again, when we do planning and we do it well and we do it for the right reason, we can get projects done. I would imagine that we should hear some aspects of why this is a priority again through the Parks Master Plan project process that's underway. And then it would just have to, of course, fall in line with everything else we try to do.
Can you remind me of the schedule for that master plan effort?
Rian? I can't remember if it's,
The
you have an
company-
update scheduled in August, I can tell you, so it's going to be later. Oh, he's there. Go ahead.
So again, at the moment, I believe I put it in the city manager's report or update. We do have 4 engagement activities starting in April 22nd. Every weekend, we will be at Jenkins Park, meaning West Haven. We'll be out at the Rose Hill neighborhood. We'll be at West Haven. So we'll be out there collecting valuable information from the community. From there, as Mr. Sanders stated, the consultant will come back and give council a briefing on where we are. All engagement will end as kids go on vacation, meaning summer break, and that's where the consultant will gather a lot of information and data gathering and starting to write the plan. From there, we also have 4 add-ons. What add-ons are is looking at some form of schematic drawings and master planning of 4 parks, meaning Tonsler Park, Washington Park, Market Street, and Court Square. So those efforts will occur in the fall. We will have engagement specifically for those parks. We are hoping to wrap everything up by the end of this year, 2024, and hoping to bring to council January 2025 to adopt the comprehensive master plan.
Good. Thank
All
you.
right.
I only have one question related to the Parkland and Trails Acquisition Fund. Is I guess there anything similar, somewhat similar to say, now there's will be that list of prioritized sidewalk projects. Is there any kind of equivalent of kind of a list with prioritization of these are acquisitions that we, are the most critical for being able to complete some of our plans around trails or other things? Basically, the point being, is there a way to look at, what's the difference between that dollar amount and the potential amount needed in order to actually implement all our plans? I don't know if that makes sense. But the bottom line is, I guess that number just strikes me as low, given even just with that CHS project, acquisitions are needed, and that's not unique. Obviously that's the case for a lot of other things as well.
Rian, I would imagine that Chris has prioritized this list to the best of his ability for what he thinks he can get. Did you have anything else you would add? It's also something we could follow up on.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is when we started developing this CIP moved from a individual CIP standpoint when we used to request a CIP for Pacific Trails, where it got merged into a trail lump sum, and that's where we asked for different funding sources from VDOT or from council to put into this lump sum so that we can acquire land and also complete certain projects. But according to our priority list, as of right now, our priority list is to really focus on our VDOT projects, meaning our Washington Park Trail, that's a priority, our Rugby Road is a priority, and then our Meadow Creek trails. Those are 3 priorities that is highly important.
And is your sense that the amount of funding is sufficient in order to follow through on what you've prioritized, or is there still like a gap there?
So we are always requesting more funding, but what we are taking approach, as Mr. Sanders stated, is that we are really looking at our trail projects to see what can we truly handle. And what we have found out is that we have some CIP projects that has been sitting in our CIP project portfolio for 4 or 5 years because we only have one staff member that takes care of all this. So instead of requesting a lot of funding, requesting for more projects, we first want to complete projects. And that's our focus as well, is to complete projects before we look beyond and request. What we're also finding out, if we have funding in the CIP from 2020 or 19, that's, as I like to call, old dollars. When we go out for bid, we are running into where the price is coming way higher than expected. And that's not where we want to find ourselves in. We would like to request funds, and in that fiscal year that we had adopted those funds, we'd like to take those projects to construction so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where the bids are coming in way above asking price.
Thank you. And I know nothing will change in the next week or so, but I'll just flag that longer term, I'm definitely interested. Is there a way for us to kind of look at this more systematically? How are we acquiring land to implement our trail and park plans? Because it just seems like a big thing that, I don't know, at least to me, it seems like maybe we could ramp up and systemize.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I tie it to the master plan work. I think that's going to help us in a big way because we should get a variety of feedback from across the city.
Kind of specific question, but for the, or is this, can I interject? The hazard and liability ash tree removal, in the project description on the Budget Explorer, it says, there's trees that are damaged, they're gonna have to cut them down as they become dangerous. And as a result, and specifically will help preserve 31 of Charlottesville's best ash trees. So we know how many they're gonna try and save by getting rid of the damaged ones so it doesn't spread. How many damaged ones are we talking about?
Rian, do you have any sense, or is Steve on? He may not be.
I don't believe Steve is on, but we do have a dashboard on our website of how many trees we remove. The last time, and this is off the top of my head, and I can get you the accurate numbers, we remove close to 50 to 100 ash trees every year. But we are still working through our list of how many ash trees are healthy. As you saw, there's 31 healthy. And again, it is a disease. So that just means we are prolonging the life of those trees. But eventually, those trees, the 31, will die. So we're trying our best to treat those trees. But to get to your point, we are taking it down roughly about 50 to 100 trees a year.
Okay, thanks. I just wasn't sure how far that 100,000 allotted was going.
We removed 110.
Anything else on that?
No.
Nothing? Okay.
One minor note there that I meant to mention on the downtown mall infrastructure repairs, the cafe permits for the mall, that revenue does get passed on to the CIP to help offset some of this budget as well. Affordable housing projects. So many of these are projects that have been in the CIP for quite some time. The newest addition here is the West Haven project, which was added at $15 million over the 5 years. In addition, I forgot to change this slide, and I apologize. This Friendship Court infrastructure improvements, the $500,000 in FY25, that is actually not for infrastructure. It is actually for phase 2, and we've changed it online, and I just forgot to pick up a different table here. The Maca and Park Street projects were in last year, and then 501 Cherry was added for this year.
Yeah, none of this is a surprise, and I think is an incredible commitment, and glad to see all of it. I only have one kind of in the weeds question, which I guess I've gotten questions of in these CIP allocations, is a permitted use closing on purchase of the land related to that specific project? Is that anything that there's clarity on, or?
So that's a question that was recently posed. I indicated that I was not willing to approve a different use than what I know council approved when the entry was made into the CIP. So that's a question for you. And if you're supportive of the notion that the funds would be used for acquisition, then we would need to hear that from you, and then we would permit that. But we have not used that for acquisition historically. It's always been construction. It's always been the actual development work. There would still be a performance agreement, even if you did the acquisition, so it doesn't mean that you lose the ability to ensure that you get what you invested in. But it is a different approach to participating in a project if it's going to be upfront for acquisition. So that'd really be at the pleasure of
Could you
council.
please restate what the, I'm sorry, what?
So I guess the question, in the CIP allocation for a project, I guess our assumption is it's only for construction. Some of them projects, they may need to close on purchasing land to even start the project, only for that specific project, not acquisition of land for some different thing. And I've heard a request that for some of these projects, they believe if they could use this money to close on acquiring the land, that it could help expedite construction, completion of the project. I'll admit, I guess, to not fully understanding all the potential implications. My first thought is just, to me, it kind of seems almost like shuffling money around, that the practical implication is not that big. But if it is accurate that, it may help speed up the completion of a project, I guess I'm comfortable with it being used for that purpose. But, I don't know if there's some unintended consequence that may come from that. But to me, it just kind of seems almost like shuffling the money around.
Yeah, and it absolutely is shuffling the money around, so there would be no major concern in that regard. It's just a different approach to using the funds, so.
So the one thing I would say with that is, all of these projects, with the exception of money that we provide to CRHA, are all cash-funded projects. So unlike bond-funded projects that are in the plan where we shuffle from year to year, it's not that much of an impact because it's just based on bond sale. But for the cash-funded projects, if you shuffle year to year, that's just to be mindful that that's cash that has to come from the general fund in that year. So if it's something that's funded in the out years and you want to move it forward, that's just another budget decision for the general fund as you think about that, or the contingency fund, or some other cash source.
Right, and I'm not interested in shifting around like the when allocations, the timeline of any of the allocations.
The main reason that this would be attractive also is because city funds don't have any conditions. This is the most flexible money that can be in a development deal. So there's a reason for the question being posed to you. So I would say that's the basis for why the ask is being made.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think I would feel comfortable making that decision on a kind of case-by-case basis and not, so if it's some information or project, Michael, that you have in mind right now, then, I will be prepared to maybe to support it, but I know what the funding is really complicated for these housing projects, because I imagine Sunshine is pulling a lot of different funding sources together. So I guess for me, I don't want to give you the blanket, approval. I want to know project by project, and if you have one tonight, Michael, and we can kind of quickly talk about it, be prepared, but.
Yeah, and this was specifically around, I believe, the MACA project. And what's been communicated to me is just that it would help facilitate getting that project underway faster. And it would just be an avenue to do it. And it was specifically, I believe, for the MACA project.
To purchase the property.
Correct.
Okay.
That was the request that I received.
Right.
Our total outlay would be the same?
Correct. And there wouldn't be any
No
shifting.
change in the amount.
Yeah, I
No
don't
shift
have-
in the timeline.
I don't have any issue with that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that as well.
You need a formal vote or something, or it's just a
No,
preference?
I just wanted a head nod.
I
You're
think
not
three.
voting, so
I think you got
Yeah.
three.
we're good.
Doesn't
Okay.
offend me.
Yeah.
I think that would still be subject to MOU that would come to them.
Right, yeah. You would be voting at that time. We would bring you the agreement at that
Okay.
time.
This is a little out of turn for what we're talking about tonight, but I know we have people involved in several projects all at once listening in. I would love to see at least one tree planted in Jenkins Park. It's bleak, it's sunny, it's next to West Haven. I think a tree would make it a lot more hospitable. 2 would be even nicer.
We'll pass
Just
that on.
Putting that out there.
Where this go?
Got it. We'll pass that on.
Whatever we do, just make sure West Haven residents are on board.
Yeah, yes.
We'll pass it on.
But I don't disagree at all.
Okay.
The park has a long, complicated history.
Yes, that's why I said I'd pass it on. I'm not making any decision. Got it.
Any further conversation here? Moving on. The technology and infrastructure category, we do have some new items this year. So the communications, the public access, that is a budget that's actually funded through public education access fees. So that is offset 100% by revenue that the city receives that is restricted to be spent for that purpose. The citywide IT strategic infrastructure account is an account that we have had, and we have used this for various things. Sometimes there were hardware or items that came up that weren't budgeted anywhere else that we were able to address. We've also used this to help smaller departments who had IT needs that that needed to be addressed quickly and were not part of their budget, and so we've used those funds for this. The voting equipment replacement, we are due to replace our voting machines. I believe the actual replacement date is 2027, and so rather than having one large outlay all at once, we are building those funds up to get to that mark in 2027. And then the circuit court case management system. This is for records management subscription services for case files at the circuit court. Any questions there?
And if I could go back, I just heard that there is one tree that was added to Jenkins Park within the past week. Just FYI.
Great. Happy to hear that. Thank
We'll,
you.
we'll reconsider any additions to that.
breaking news.
That's the kind of quick responsiveness I like.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we finished with all of the categories and the sort of the project detail within the CIP, and wanted to talk a little bit about the funding mechanics of this. CIP contingency account is an account that we've talked about a lot. It is sort of the savings account that we've referenced. The origin of these funds are largely from our fund balance policy, which any excess fund balance at the end of the year comes to you with a proposal that those dollars go to the CIP to cash fund projects. As I mentioned earlier, we have built up a rather significant balance at the end of 2023 and currently for a number of reasons. Largely, in 2021, we did not cash fund any capital projects. We held that money as a COVID reserve. We didn't need it, so we transferred that in. Additionally, in 2023, for the first time in a long time, council did actually fund a contingency as part of the budget. That was done with a 1 cent real estate tax increase that was there to anticipate greater either debt service or capital needs. At the time, we were still chewing on the Beaufort School project and how much it was going to cost. So that was another $2 million that was put in 2023. When we put in the budget for 2024, the CIP plan, we took a look at that $20 million balance. And if you recall, the Beaufort project started at $50 million, and by the time we were done, we had gotten it up to $90 million. And so part of that, we started with a conversation about we didn't have debt capacity to do that, and then we figured out things changed and we had capacity, but how are we going to pay the debt on it? And so a whole bunch of series of things changed, and part of what we did was to start allocating some of this large cash balance that's in the contingency. And so we used $8.3 million of that in 2024, again, as another offset for the Beaufort project. At the time, council was considering an option that was roughly around $72 million. And when there was the prospect of a grant from the state, a construction grant, and council made the decision to add some additional changes to the project, which got it to 90. We used this contingency sort of as a placeholder in anticipation of the grant. Turns out that for Beaufort, we actually ended up getting about $18 million, just under $18 million in state grant funds. In addition, the schools had a surplus at the end of last year, and they sent over about $4.4 million towards the Beaufort project, as well as some existing fund balance, which amounted to about 1.5. So if I've kept track of all that, they've roughly, those sources have reduced the bond need for the school project by about $22 million. And so that has, that's how we have used the contingency in that way. Essentially, the contingency here is for things that come up during the year that have not been contemplated as part of your plan, and it gives council the flexibility to address those. One such instance of that was the Zero East High opportunity. We used $6 million out of here to fund that. The Premier Circle appropriation, which council passed in January, was another opportunity. That was about $750,000. It's red here just as a reminder to myself that we've not actually paid that out yet. So, but it is coming out of the balance here. And then if you'll recall, we had a year-end surplus last year that was a large amount, and $15.8 million of that actually came to the contingency account per our policy. And all of this leaves us currently with a balance of about $19 million. This amounts that you see here for the CIP for FY '25 through '29, these are dollars that right now the current CIP plan, if you looked in the revenue, this is noted as a funding source, again, to either offset largely cash funding that we need for the cash projects. All of those are subject to change as our CIP continues to change in the out years, and they could certainly be revisited. That leaves us with an unallocated balance of about $15.6 million. Part of that we've talked about using for one-time. All of these dollars, very important, these are one-time uses. And so that's why it's well suited for the CIP. The bond rating agencies love the fact that that's additional cash that we're paying for projects. And did you want to say anything else?
Yeah, and this is $10 to $12 million of this is what I have targeted for the one-time use for the actuarial expenses related to collective bargaining and our other pay modernization efforts, depending on, of course, passage of the budget.
So of the 19 million that live in this account right now, 12 are being spent in this, 10 to 12
I would
being
say,
spent in this budget.
I would say of the 15.6 million, because we're projecting the additional needs for the other years. I don't want you to lose sight of those, because any choice to do something with that now means that it would not be available for that purpose.
Do we expect to get the 1.5 million for the water leak appropriation reimbursed from insurance?
Thank you. Some of that will be reimbursed, maybe a large part of that. That's still in the process, but yes, whatever we get reimbursed from insurance would come back here.
Okay.
That's the intent.
Obviously, there may be some things that along the way we're upgrading that insurance wouldn't pay for, but is it reasonable to think that maybe $1 million out of that would come back to us?
Do you have any? I don't have a status
That
on
would be a question for risk. We'd have to find
I can
out.
find out for you.
Do we have a timeline on when that's going to be fixed?
The
City Hall?
Oh, it should be done, I don't want to get in trouble. May, June?
May.
What, Jason, what have you heard? Sure, May, June, okay, good.
I,
That's what we're targeting, because I'm sorry, before we go back. So, and remember that we went ahead and accelerated the planned project in the first floor of City Hall. So hopefully there was no additional surprises, because we were already planning to undo some things and redo them anyway.
So things are kind of running together for me at this point, I'm sorry, but, so the surplus, a significant portion of the surplus was going to help with
the one time.
But then you're also taking it out of the CIP continue?
No, remember when Chris made the presentation to you about what the surplus was, at that time, the end of his statement was, based on our policy, we're asking you to move it to the CIP contingency.
Okay.
And then I chimed in right after and said, and I encourage you to do that because I need most of it.
Okay.
That's, to take you back to that moment, you remember me
All right.
saying that?
Thank
Yeah.
you.
So that's basically what this is reflective of. The addition of that $15.8 million was tied to that statement I made.
And as a policy, as a practice, money, it does not get spent out of this account without coming back to council
Right.
for approval.
So you kind of told us about this money left over, but he came in.
And said, forget about it. Yes,
Okay.
I did say that.
Okay.
Just this one time.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that
So-
often,
So
but
for
this one
people who are
time.
curious
Yes.
about the surplus we had last year, it has been allocated to help fund this proposed budget.
No.
Not all of it.
But
No,
Yeah.
so it is not part of the budget at all.
Right.
It is, we closed out FY '23, the
Yes.
surplus amount went to the CIP contingency.
That's
It's gonna
the
sit
part.
here. It's not funding this budget, but as a consequence of this budget and collective bargaining and the class and comp study, we will be coming back to you to fund a payment to the actuary that will support those increased salaries.
Okay. So the point is that that money has been put to use. Will be.
Yes.
Anticipated use, yes.
Okay. Has been scheduled for usage.
Most of it, absolutely, yes.
Any other questions on the contingency?
Nope, Sam kind of took care of.
Yeah, forget about it.
So, this is the table everybody hates, and I love it because I'm a nerd. But, you know, a couple takeaways I want to say. There is a lot that goes on in this chart, and there are no numbers on here that I really expect you to take away as much as to think about the story that it's telling. So, a couple of things just to real quickly describe for those who aren't familiar with this table, how it works. The left-hand side of the table is kind of our planning piece. And so what this does is it takes into account both historical, so anything in black has already happened. Anything in blue is part of the debt projection that we are working under. So the first column are the projected or planned bond issues. The second column is the annual debt service that we will have to pay based on these projections or that we have paid. The general fund expenditure budget is just that. It's the general fund budget, and that is the basis for our debt service ratio policy, which basically says we strive for a target of 9 but will not exceed 10%. When we started the Beaufort conversation, this chart was getting us up into the 10 and 11%, largely with a $50 million project. And so we started that conversation saying that we did not have capacity. As the general fund budget grows, which it has, as you can look at this column, this third column over from fiscal year, as that general fund budget grows, that percentage declines. And so basically the takeaway here from this planning side is that through 2024, and we are not in danger of even exceeding our 9% target. So the takeaway is we do have bonding capacity. Moving over to the right-hand side of the chart, what I've labeled the consequences is that while we have capacity to issue debt, we have to pay for it. And so the general fund transfer is the way that we pay for our debt. That is a cash transfer from the general fund. We also have, over the years, in anticipation of knowing that we were going to be issuing more debt, we began to build up a fund balance in the debt service fund with the idea that we would like to maintain sort of steady eddy, slight, that our debt service transfer would increase at a level consistent with our increases in our general fund. And then if there were any additional funds added, that's noted here. And then you'll see that there is a rundown of the debt service fund balance over time by employing that strategy. So taking all of that into account, you'll see that the debt that is in blue. So first of all, let me just say that these numbers that are for the projected debt have not changed from the chart that you saw last year. So there, the increased bond issues in 24, 25, 26 were based on what we thought the spend rate was going to be and what we would need to issue in debt for the Beaufort School project. There are a lot of moving parts right now in terms of our CIP. One, as I just mentioned, we've received about $22 million for that project. That means that we are saving capacity. Those are less bonds we need to issue for that project. In addition, there's some action, as you all are aware, in the General Assembly for a potential referendum on a 1% sales tax that, if were approved, and the city voters approved of that, that revenue could either come into the CIP and be used to cash fund projects, or it could be used to fund debt service for projects. So all of that to say, there are a lot of moving parts. in terms of how many bonds we'll be needing to issue and when we'll be needing to issue them. So I took the approach with this debt projection to kind of look at this from a big picture standpoint. And so in blue, if you just added up all of those numbers, there's a projected debt issuance of just over $231 million. If you go back through CIPs prior that have been approved, we have bonds that were previously authorized in those CIPs but have not been issued yet for various reasons. The project is not, as I mentioned earlier, we try not to issue the bonds until we're either ready, till it's a done deal and we're moving things along. And so we have bonds that were previously authorized but not issued, just under $158 million, which leaves us about $73 million of the debt service that's shown here. The current CIP in front of you contemplates another $123 million worth of bonds, which is about $50 million more than is on this chart. So what? I just told you have a lot of capacity, and you do. But if we look at this consequences side of the chart, you'll see that in 2023, our debt service is about $13 million. And if you pop on down in 2033, just about 10 years, we're looking at a debt service that is doubled based on issuing the idea that we would issue just $231 million worth of debt. In that case, if you see this dollar increase to the right of that, you'll see that in this transfers that I'm planning, they're very modest increases, 300,000, 300,000. If we were selling these bonds based on the Beaufort project, come 2026, guess what? You have to increase the general fund transfer by $1.3 million in that year. Still no problem because you're still drawing down, while that's a big increase to the general fund, you're still got debt service fund balance that you can draw on, that you can, make that a little bit more, a little bit less, however your situation looked like. So we're still doing fine until we get to 2029. And if you look, starting in 2026, even in this scenario, every year we're looking at least $1 million all the way up to $1.3 million in additional transfers every year from the general fund to pay your debt service. And you'll note that in years 2030 through 2033, even with $1 million increase every year, you're not covering your debt service. You've exhausted your debt service fund balance, and you would be looking to the general fund for additional $2 to $4 million in those years. So all this to say, while we do have capacity, and as you think about this, it does have to be paid. It does require planning. And is this scenario going to happen? Absolutely not, because we're never going to come to you with a proposed CIP or a debt service fund that's going to let this happen, because that would be not responsible. But the point here being is that the debt service will become a pressure point on your general fund with the projects that you've laid out already previously and with the projects that are laid out in this plan. So when you factor in whether you add cash funded projects, the cash needs for that, if you factor in cash needs for the debt service fund, you could potentially have between those two things, $2 to $4 million of cash that would need to come from the general fund in any given year to pay the CIP.
So I can tell you're just in love with this, but you need to,
Dumb it down?
What? Yeah, I'm trying to get to, is it good or bad, or what are you saying?
So I'm just saying it is neither good. It's good that you have a debt service fund. It's good balance. It is good that we are looking at this 10, 11, 12 years out. It is good that we are planning for it. As long as we plan for it and think about it, then you're fine. But
keep
it's
us on the right
expensive.
track.
We will, but it is expensive. So don't be shocked by the sticker shock when we come to you with a budget that says your debt service transfer from the general fund is $2 to $4 million increase in one budget.
And is this, this is assuming annual growth in the budget of 3%, right?
It, yes.
Except that 2026 is $16 million less than 2025.
I'm sorry.
You look at the general fund expenditure budget, third column, fourth column
Oh,
over.
I didn't update that. You're right. I just
And all of
plopped
the
in-
numbers below that are consequently low as well.
Yes, I will update that. That is good catch. Sorry.
And
my,
for-
my, so so what that means is your ratio would come down, but the debt service would not change.
So the general fund transfer, that'd be the 1, 2, 3, the fifth column over, what is that number a function of?
So that number is a function of, one, what we plan for in the projection. It is also a function of our 1% meals tax policy, where the equivalent of 1% of the meals tax goes to pay down debt service. And so that is a number that we are in control of, and we reevaluate each budget year.
And do we change, I mean, first of all, is there a formula that we're using to derive that number?
No, the only formula is the 1% meals tax. The
Right.
rest of it is basically feeding through this table and this projection to try, it used to be in years past that the formula would be, how can we keep it as level as possible, or the increase as small as possible, and still maintain, not come up with a $4 to $5 million negative debt service fund balance, so that you've got to have a big increase in the general fund. So this is really, besides the fact that I have the general fund budget wrong, this is really meant to be for just illustrative purposes, that the debt service fund is going to be increasing significantly. Although you do have capacity, it is not without impact.
Okay.
But there again, if the sales tax, that could be $12 to $13 million a year, that could be used for this, and non-issue. So, although that debt service would have to be for school projects.
Right.
So it couldn't buy down the full amount of the debt service.
So I want to get questions finished, because we did have public comments. I didn't want to be too late. So other questions on this? You want to finish your slide? Or, I'm sorry.
Not a question, just a very brief pontification. The population of the city of Charlottesville has remained largely unchanged for the past 30 years. We've got a couple thousand more people, but generally, it's pretty in line. It says in 1990 we were at about 40,000 and a half. Right now we're about 45,500. So over 30 years, a 5,000 increases. It's a relatively flat line. So, but the budget itself is going to keep going up and keep going up and keep going up. So we just have to start.
Maybe. It's not always a guarantee.
Okay. But theoretically, potentially, that's what the trend shows. We just passed the upzoning at the end of the year last year, which is going to allow for more homes to be built within city limits. That's going to, yes, incur some additional charges, but it's also going to allow us to spread the tax burden out amongst more people. So that is something that we should keep in mind, and we should also welcome for various reasons, for transportation efficiencies, for land use efficiencies, but also to help us pay for everything without your individual tax burden going up every year. Thank you.
Okay.
Anything else in this chart? go away from it, sadly.
I like the color of blue chosen.
Thank you, thank you.
Used to be red,
I think.
At one point it
Blue's
was,
much better.
yes. We had to show that.
I didn't want to scream. And that's all of our that's all the presentation we have. This was just the refuse stuff that we talked about earlier.
So before I get to the public comment, I want to, see where council is, on the budget. We, Sam, we have, the fourth next, tell us the next steps.
Yeah, so,
I actually did have another
yeah, there's a
screen.
slide that, I just pointed that out to Chrissy. The next work session is April 4th. That will be your last scheduled work session in support of this budget cycle, unless you need another one. And what we have planned, we call that our catch-up. The goal is to not have too much to catch up on, because we would only be 5 days away from your voting on the budget as well. We have 2 items that we've identified for what we would like to engage with you on at that meeting. Of course, if there's anything in between now and then that you wanted to identify in the way of questions, if we could answer those questions ahead of time, make sure we're satisfied with those, then we may not necessarily need to engage at the work session. But reconciling our Vibrant Community Fund distribution, there's been much talk about adjusting, so we need to get the clarity on that based on our conversations this week. I do believe I have that, and the budget team will take that under advisement when we meet next week and have that ready for you to be able to see that on the 4th. And then revisiting your tax rate decision, because we would be looking for you to confirm where you stand on that. You will be dealing with this beginning, you'll be setting it up as of Monday night's meeting anyway. But the goal would be to have confirmation from you what you're doing and pulling the levers in the way that we would need to know what resources are available for this budget, with what keeping in mind what has been proposed as of March 5th with the budget draft was 1% on lodging, 1% on meals, and 2 cents on the real estate tax. Any adjustments to that does not come out to be an even number, means that the budget has a hole in it. So if we're gonna have any change to that, April 4th is when we need to know what that is, so that we can repair said hole with an alteration of some kind. And then other items, of course, would be what might be left.
Any questions on that? If any, we floated the proposed increases and the various levers that we have for about a month now, and, we all have expressed our, support, concerns, angst with it. We need to know, as soon as possible, where we stand on that, so.
Yeah, and I guess I'll say, so agree, there's going to need to be work to reconcile the VCF. Obviously, that's not going to happen tonight. Nothing new, but I'll just say again, and we'll discuss it on Monday. My largest concern about the proposed tax rate increases is I think it would have been better for us to lean on real estate rather than meals, just because I do, again, think that the meals taxes are most regressive revenue source and doesn't have a relief program. For tonight, the nature of this is what you add tends to get more attention from people than what's baked into it. But I think a lot of incredible things were baked into the CIP from the very release of this budget. So by and large, I'm very happy with where the CIP is. I think there's a lot of transformative things with the library, affordable housing being our second largest CIP expense now, and $9 million this year, not even counting real estate tax and other things. I know the city manager likes to say we bat a punch above our weight
class. Yes.
And there's no other locality in Virginia doing anything similar to that. So it's just, I think there's just a lot of great things in it. The only small thing I can think of with the CIP is, for years we've gotten requests about the Drury Brown Bridge, and I do wonder if there's any opportunity for a pretty low dollar amount to just activate it a little and make it, because people can walk by that from the Amtrak station all the time and have no idea that.
Yeah. Mr. Freeze has an update for you.
Cool.
And it's not affiliated with the CIP. We're going to get it done without doing that.
Yeah,
Right.
we are allocating $50,000 and DPW is
How
going to
much?
be, 50,000.
50, thank you.
Yep, and DPW is going to be doing a bunch of the repair work related to the plaques. I don't know, Stephen, are you still on? Do you have that list of exactly what you're doing?
And if he doesn't have it, we can actually prepare that as an update. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so we've assigned it to a project manager. We've already assessed what the needs are, and we plan to finalize our estimate and submit it to the city manager. We anticipate at least this summer some action on the scope of it. So it's going to get done. That's the message.
And is somebody talking with Kay Slaughter about this?
That's my job.
Okay.
Yep.
But thank you, and that's very exciting to hear.
Finally, we will get it done.
Yeah, I would like to echo most of what Michael said. I still think in terms of taxation, I'm still with the 112. But setting that aside, I really agree with him about this CIP. I think when Juan and I came on board 2 years ago, it seemed like an epic struggle over Buford, and now we're doing cool things like library renovation in West Haven and neat housing projects, and I mentioned the library, Walker. When I look at the CIP, I see a city that's investing in itself and thinking about the future and building. We talked a lot about sidewalks. I'm very optimistic that a couple of years from now, we're going to be looking at real success stories. So, kudos to you and your staff on helping us be disciplined and stick with process. I know that that's important. But I'm just very encouraged. I know that the operational budget this year has been a challenge with new staffing and those investments, but it is encouraging to see, I think, a robust CIP. We're answering people's needs, investing in the future, doing things we've been talking about for a long time, like the library. So I'm excited about that.
Questions or comments before I open up the public hearing?
One
Yeah.
final thing that I just forgot is there anything we need to be thinking about or preparing for, and maybe you'll know this answer, Brian, because you're on the RWSA. Hopefully this isn't the case, but if all the stuff that happened with the pump station is not covered by insurance or is only partially, could that be an unexpected big hit to our budget, or?
No, they will take it out of their CIP.
They have in their reserves. There's been discussions about adjusting their own CIP to help
Okay.
And their
accommodate.
own reserve. I mean, it could ultimately trickle down into our rates, as it were.
But it won't be a sudden
Right.
anything for us. And then,
And I spoke to
Did
him
you talk to
about
Lenny?
coming to present sometime soon.
okay.
We talked.
And then I guess also, if city council approved the option 3 of the jail renovation, that would basically be $700,000 a year in the CIP on top of
General fund.
general fund. Okay.
1.1 million.
1.1 million annually. Okay.
One note we did forget to tell you, our revenue team is meeting one more time.
Oh, that's right.
And we will have some updates and likely a few revenue changes for you. Not huge, but there'll be
Positive, hopefully.
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm done.
I'll now open the public hearing. Does anyone public like to speak? Yes, sir. Yes. We know you like the trees, but
I do like the trees. I am not a tree hugger by any means, but I am the 3rd largest planter of trees in the city of Charlottesville, and I planted 22 this year. So that is not that many. After you guys and after Relief, then it's me. I fell in love with this city in 2006. I came here for New Year's. My older brother, we had a great time. I've moved all over the country since then. I finally came back. Since that time, we've lost a quarter of our urban canopy. My best guess is that we'll lose another quarter by 2050. I'm not, that's it's a lot of trees. I understand some of them are for good reasons. I know that increased density is important. If we keep funding the way that we've been funding, we're going to lose our urban forest.
I forgot to ask for your name and your.
Yeah, sorry. Tyler Miller, 1500 Green Street. I also wanted to say that I really appreciated you knitting. I think that it's an important focus aid, and
yes,
it's very good for mental health. So
thank you.
Please, please, please just consider. I heard a lot about built infrastructure today. I didn't hear a whole lot about grown infrastructure, and it takes a lot of time, to get those things done. It's not something you can just throw in the ground overnight. You have a mature tree. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And Richmond has proved increasing tree canopy does not have to be in opposition to density and housing growth, so I appreciate that.
He is going to speak.
Yeah.
Good evening, Council. Rory Stolzenberg. I live in Water Street. I have a couple things for you tonight, actually. First, maybe the reason I came, I urge you to fully fund Ben's requests for sidewalks. I do think that out-year projections are important. Those are the basis for next year's CIP. So when Chrissy comes to us in like 6-7 months, she'll be looking at that first. And I would encourage you to plan for both everything that Mr. Chambers has requested. And again, remember that that's Tier 1 construction and Tier 2 planning, which turns into requests for grants that require grant matches. So be generous with those projections and expect it to be more than what's in that list. Second, I'd advise caution on using CIP funds for acquisition of property. I disagree with the idea that it's shuffling money around. It actually involves a pretty big change in risk. When funds can only be used for development, they're only drawn upon once all of those elements are in place for development to begin. When they can be used for acquisition, they are, and that's the request, to happen long before that. I would urge you that in any agreement to do that, either have the city acquire the land itself and donate it to the project, or have some recourse for the city, such as a forgivable loan, where the city can get control of that land if things fall apart, which unfortunately does sometimes happen. Lastly, as you consider revenue, one item I'd like you to consider outside of just the numbers in front of you for the current year projection is that some sources of revenue come with second order effects. The real estate tax, as you guys remember, we get quite a bit of money in revenue sharing from the county from our agreement prior to annexation stopping. One major part of that formula is tax effort, which is the amount of essentially the tax rate relative to the other locality. As you increase the real estate tax on a 2-year delay, because we use old data for the formula, the amount the county has to pay us in revenue sharing goes up. So if you had a 3-cent higher real estate tax 2 years ago, you'd be getting about $480,000 more in tax revenue. Other sources of funds don't come with that. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak? Sam, did you have anything else?
No, I think we've said a lot. That was enough.
All right, we stand adjourned.